How long had he waited for this exact moment? He reached out his hand, feeling that it was finally happening. When he opened his eyes in an unfamiliar place, that unmistakable feeling of a new ceiling hit him. Possession, transmigration, reincarnation, whatever it was, the guy was utterly convinced he had made it. This was Kim Sung-woo, a Korean citizen who had spent his entire life preparing for a moment like this. He had devoured every single book, novel, web story, and video game his world had to offer, relentlessly analyzing every work that crossed his path without leaving a single stone unturned. Sung-woo was that insufferable critic who would drop 5,000 character essays just to explain why your story didn't work, doing it meticulously day in and day out without rest, like a true obsessive maniac. He knew world-building designs by heart, memorized complex character relationship diagrams, and even held exact locations of hidden items and legendary artifacts in his head. Nothing escaped him. Eventually, he was banned from almost every online community for his sheer toxicity and for ruining the lives of authors. Yet in the end, fate granted him his ultimate wish. Having transmigrated to another world, he looked around to find himself in a rural village straight out of a medieval fairy tale, trapped in the body of a 4- or 5-year-old child. First things first, check his stats. With supreme confidence, he extended his hand and shouted, "Status window! Silence!" Not even a single sad, floating text box appeared. Nothing. He scratched his head, realizing this wasn't the typical isekai fantasy with a game-like system, but it didn't matter. The guy knew too much. Having analyzed thousands of works that lacked status windows, he was certain he could dominate this world through pure experience alone. His plan B was simple: invent something modern and get rich, which couldn't possibly be that hard. He now inhabited the body of one Ivan Petrovich, the son of illiterate farmers who didn't even know the name of the country they lived in while working the land from dawn to dusk. Sung-woo decided he would start by making soap to innovate the market, but his first attempt was an unmitigated disaster. Things didn't play out like the novels he read. Not only did he catch a beating from his mother for messing around with lye, but he also discovered that soap already existed in this world. What a massive fail. By his 6th week, while out fetching eggs, he saw that people were even delivering newspapers in the village. The technology level made no sense, and he froze on the spot. Printing presses and newspapers in the countryside meant this was definitely not the Middle Ages. That day, he began crossing off almost every option on his mental list of candidate novels. As the months dragged on, Sung-woo finally learned the name of the country and the king who ruled it. With no options left, he tossed what remained of his list straight into the campfire. Nothing fit. He didn't know the country, didn't recognize the monarch, and knew nothing about the neighboring lands. Lost in an unfamiliar place as he sat before the fire, his main question was no longer which specific work he had landed in, but what damn genre he was cursed to live through. Then, in his 4th year of transmigration, reality hit him straight in the face. The Demon King descended with his army, and royal soldiers arrived at the village to draft every capable man. They told Ivan's mother to stay behind with the boy while forced recruiting Ivan's father to the front lines. The man promised he would return, but the grim expressions on the officers' faces said otherwise. The officers' grim faces told a completely different story. Ivan and his mother stood together, watching helplessly as his father was marched away toward the battlefield. It was the last time they would ever see him. From that moment on, the distinction between the mind of Sung-woo and the identity of Ivan began to blur into a single, confusing existence. By his 6th year, Ivan was adept at heavy farm work, relieving his mother's burdens as best he could while enduring a hard, unforgiving life. At age 12, he spent every spare moment studying and mastering the local writing system, determined to decode his reality. But tragedy struck with full force when he turned 14. He received the news he had feared most: an official notification declaring his father's death, a piece of paper that had been issued 2 long years prior. Ivan clutched the document in rage, utterly bewildered. What kind of story was this? An isekai packed with gunpowder, steam engines, knights, mages, and a demon king, all thrown together into a gory, chaotic war. He stared blankly into the distance, his life a tangled mess that not even the most brilliant critic could ever hope to decipher. His mother was completely shattered, weeping uncontrollably in her grief. Watching her from the shadows, Ivan was consumed by a suffocating guilt, feeling like the worst person alive for inhabiting her real son's body. The very next day, he made a drastic decision. "Don't worry, Mom," he told her with a coldness unnerving for a 14-year-old. He enlisted in the army, entering a military force that had already begun utilizing steam-powered trains. The annual pay was a pitiful 15 copper coins, but he resolved to send every last piece back home. Not out of filial love, but to assuage his guilt for taking away her only remaining support. It did not take long for Ivan to discover that his new body possessed a terrifying, innate talent for violence. By 18, He had already spent 4 relentless years on the front lines, transformed from a raw recruit into a hardened veteran who had accumulated countless battle achievements. Yet the war effort as a whole was a complete disaster. Front lines were collapsing across the continent, and half of the allied nations were literally burning to the ground. Just when all hope seemed lost, the legendary hero, Isabel's father, finally made his appearance. Ivan felt a sudden spark of recognition, believing he had finally cracked the code of this world's genre. It was a classic heroic fantasy, a traditional RPG journey. While the hero's arrival brought a wave of hope to the masses, the bloody truth of the trenches remained unchanged. Where Ivan fought, monsters continued to slaughter soldiers en masse, and regular troops were still being brutally crushed, despite the legend in the sky. By the time he turned 28, Ivan had endured 14 uninterrupted years of active military service. The tide of the war finally began to turn as the hero's party eliminated the Demon King's generals one by one. Ivan was eventually assigned to an elite unit designated for the dirtiest tasks of the war, the Extermination Squad, a specialized operations team deployed to purge remaining enemy forces whenever chaos erupted on the field. 2 years later, the hero's party succeeded in slaying the Demon King. Ivan finally saw a light at the end of the dark tunnel, standing by and patiently waiting for the end credits to roll, desperately clinging to the belief that he would at last escape this waking nightmare now that his mission in this world was done. 2 more years passed, yet the end of the story simply refused to arrive. Now 32, Ivan watched as the Extermination Squad dwindled to barely a fifth of its original strength. They were no longer needed, and High Command was eager to dissolve the unit altogether. Taking matters into his own hands, Ivan accepted one final, suicidal mission just to bring it all to an end. Miraculously, he survived the ordeal and immediately requested his discharge. He could not endure another second as a soldier and wanted nothing more than for this endlessly dragging epilogue to come to a close once and for all. By the 30th year since his transmigration, 34-year-old Ivan returned to his home village, only to be met with total and absolute solitude. His mother had passed away 10 years prior. Left entirely alone in the world, he decided to establish an orphanage for children displaced by the war near the capital, trapped in a reality where the end credits still showed no sign of appearing anywhere. Thus, the Basiliza orphanage was born, and Ivan became a guardian to children who, much like himself, had lost everything. Ivan let out a heavy sigh as he reviewed his paperwork, feeling the slow grind of daily routine wear him down. Picking up his journal, he began to write, desperately missing his former life, his home world, and the food he used to enjoy. He jotted down a list of dishes he craved if he ever managed to return to Korea. Kimchi, fried chicken, rich stews, a painful longing that ached in his very soul. It had already been 4 years since the Demon King's demise. When on earth was this story going to end? Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway snapped his veteran instincts to attention. He froze, instantly analyzing the rhythm, force, and cadence of the approaching stride. The subtle creak of worked leather, the faint scent of gunpowder, and the steady, practiced pace all pointed to one conclusion. This was no civilian, but a highly trained soldier, and he was coming alone. Ivan didn't lower his guard for a single second, his hand instinctively gripping his weapon as his fingers remembered precisely how to kill despite his years in retirement. The office door began to slide open slowly, revealing the silhouette of the man who was looking for him. Dmitri stepped inside, greeting him with cheerful enthusiasm. "It's been a while, sir! How have you been? I really should have come by to visit you more often," he said with a bright smile. But Ivan was in no mood for jokes and met him holding a hand axe. "You should have knocked," he reprimanded coldly. Dmitri complained that Ivan never beat around the bush and added that his beard didn't suit him at all. Ivan lowered the weapon, though his tone remained sharp and serious. "Tell me why you're here," he demanded without wasting breath. Dmitri pulled a sealed letter from his uniform jacket. "You don't even give me time to sit down." As impatient as ever. "This is for you," he said, handing over the envelope. Ivan eyed the official seal with deep suspicion as Dmitri elaborated. "Read it. It's a personal letter from Her Highness the Princess. Is it laced with poison or something?" Ivan asked sarcastically. Dmitri laughed it off, guessing it was likely just a friendly greeting to see how he was enjoying his retirement. But Ivan knew that was a lie. The princess was not the type to send a high-ranking officer across the land just to say hello. "Asking how I am, Her Highness the Princess," Ivan muttered skeptically under his breath. He was thinking of Elizabeth Kirillovna Krasilov, better known as Iron-Blooded Lisa, a woman who never wasted time on empty pleasantries. Ivan quickly analyzed the situation. She must be in a massive tight spot, he thought. Dmitri confirmed that the military administration was pressing her daily to withdraw troops. To make matters worse, Crown Prince Alexander was attempting to carve the country into 5 separate pieces to sell off to the highest bidder. And while all this political maneuvering unfolded, the king remained dead silent, refusing to intervene at all. The very map of the kingdom was hanging in the balance. Dmitri then shifted the conversation to deliver an unexpected piece of news. Ta-da! An international university was established during the war. It's the most prestigious institution across all allied realms. He was referring to Yansk University. Dmitri asked him if he knew who made up the incoming freshman class and the new faculty members. First, there was Isabel, the daughter of the legendary hero Maximilian and heiress to an immense power. Then came Oscar, son of the noble knight Gelbede and wielder of an imposing spear. Next was Elpfera, the talented daughter of the great mage Beolgreen. Alongside them were Nasiris, daughter of Inar the Berserker, and Lucia, disciple of the renowned thief Enrique. Absolute heavyweights. In short, every single child of the heroes who defeated the Demon King was enrolled there. To top it all off, Patricia, the former saint of the Heroes Party, was named the new head of the department. They were promising youths from across the globe who had trained relentlessly to enter that academy. Dimitri's tone turned grave as he weighed the sheer importance of these students. If even one of them dies or gets injured, he warned, this country is completely finished. Which means, Ivan interjected, instantly catching the gravity of the situation. And what does any of this have to do with me? Dmitri got straight to the point. You have to protect them for exactly 3 years. Make sure they don't get so much as a single scratch until they return to their home countries. Ivan closed his eyes in sheer frustration. Why on earth did the aftermath of a hero's story have to end up like this? He thought bitterly. The cliché idea that the hero slays the Demon King and everyone lives happily ever after was absolute garbage. The world remained an absolute mess of political and social chaos. And now, out of nowhere, the narrative was abruptly pivoting into an academy story. Something felt completely wrong to him. Ivan froze in place as a sudden realization struck him like a bolt of lightning, the gears in his mind spinning at breakneck speed. Wait a second, he muttered, his eyes glinting with a cold, dangerous intensity. He finally understood. Ivan slammed his hand onto the desk with enough force to shake the entire room, radiating a crimson aura of pure, suppressed fury. Dmitri could only watch in utter confusion, completely clueless as to what was happening. Damn it, Ivan roared, unable to contain his anger at the utterly ridiculous situation he found himself in. Could it be? He thought as his knuckles cracked against the wooden surface. The staggering reality hit him full force. A frightened Dmitri stammered, "Sir, what's wrong? Are you all right?" Ivan could focus on only one horrifying truth. Was this an academy novel all along? He had worked his fingers to the bone in this foreign world through 30 grueling years of non-stop war. 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears, only to discover that all of it was merely the damn prologue to the actual story. Ivan couldn't believe the cruel joke destiny was playing on him. Taking a deep breath, he regained his composure, though his eyes remained fierce with indignation. Burning. So I just have to make sure those brats graduate. Fine, let's go see that ending. I will fulfill the order, Ivan declared with ironclad determination. It was time to go home. Kim Sung-wo was ready to wrap this up once and for all. Lisa's letter still lay open on his desk. Banka, how have you been? I hear news of you every now and then. It seems you are doing well, the text read. Lisa fondly recalled when they used to tend the garden together, lamenting that he had left without so much as looking back, never giving her the chance to hold a proper tea party. But Banka, winter is coming once again. A winter, even colder and quieter than the last, the princess warned in her missive. Lisa walked through the palace gardens, her fingers gently touching the leaves with a sense of melancholy as she thought of her old ally. Banka, my most trusted lumberjack, the letter continued, reflecting the deep bond and profound trust she placed in him. Despite his absence, Lisa promised to reward him threefold for whatever he desired, and if even that were not enough, she was willing to pay the rest with her friendship. And if not even that can settle the debt, then I will pay with our memories, Lisa wrote with a gravity that transcended the paper. The princess made her final request explicitly clear. The kingdom still needs your devotion. Just as you gave it before, you shall do so once more. The offer was impossible to refuse, concluding in a solemn tone, with my warmest regards, Kirilovna. Ivan finished reading in total silence, absorbing every single word of the message before summarizing his new mission. For the 3 years, the children of the Heroes Party would attend the university. He had to ensure none of them were injured or killed, acting as a bodyguard operating from the shadows. To think the genre of this world was an academy story all along, Ivan mused. If he could just survive 3 more years and see the end of this narrative, he could finally fulfill his dream of returning home. Turning to Dmitri, Ivan asked who would be arriving first. Dmitri informed him that the daughter of King Einar of Drone was already on her way, making her the first on the list to head toward the academy. Einar, Ivan muttered. The name of his former comrade in arms brought a rush of vivid memories back to his mind. He couldn't help but dwell on the past. Though the man was now hailed as the great king of Drone, to Ivan, Einar would always be that wild, unhinged member of the Heroes Party he remembered so clearly. He recalled Einar's boisterous, booming laugh, Bonka! Hey, little Ivan! This is how you swing an axe! The berserker had been an absolute lunatic on the battlefield, and now the person heading to the academy first was precisely the daughter of that very same maniac, inheriting both his sheer strength and volatile temper. In the kingdom of Drone, the princess's departure was treated as a major national event. "I'm so proud! The greatest descendant of our realm!" The subjects shouted amid grand celebrations and festive music. The crowd was utterly convinced she would conquer everything in her path, though a few onlookers traded surprised giggles. "Did you hear? She's going there to master orchestral music." Nasiris, the eldest daughter of the berserker, was not pleased with the mocking chatter in the slightest. "What's so wrong with orchestral music?" she thought indignantly. "Orchestra!" she yelled indignantly while preparing to depart. With her instrument case strapped securely to her back and a fierce determination in her eyes, Nasiris swore to herself that she would prove to everyone just how wildly successful she could become in the music department. The Knights of Drone granted her a legendary send-off, truly worthy of her royal bloodline. 2 days later, her train was speeding through the snow-capped mountains, but tragedy struck without warning. The train derailed in a blinding explosion of fire and twisted metal, shattering the peaceful rhythm of the journey. The first major event of the story had officially begun. What? A sudden terrorist attack on the train? Ivan exclaimed upon receiving the news. Dmitri confirmed the dire facts with an expression of absolute worry. It had been a calculated, deliberate strike. Ivan grew quiet, gazing out the window as the sun began its descent below the horizon. He knew all too well that nothing in this world happened by sheer chance. Everything followed a narrative pattern. In a typical hero's journey, the protagonist and their companions defeat the Demon King, and peace finally returns to the realm. That was the happy ending everyone anticipated. Sometimes, even one of the demon commanders might join the hero's party out of convenience or a sudden change of heart, but at the end of the road, light always triumphs over darkness. Everyone knows those classic formulas. They are universal laws governing the destinies of characters and their worlds alike. The peace bought with so much blood should have been eternal, but every literary genre operates on its own brand of common sense. In an academy story, danger lurks in the most unexpected moments precisely to test the incoming students. Ivan recalled the notes and materials he had burned 30 years ago when he first arrived in this world, plot outlines that were now beginning to make sense in the worst possible way. And he found himself standing at the Igorovik station, waiting for the train carrying a terrorist attack already scheduled by the script of this world, with time rapidly running out. Sitting calmly on a bench, Ivan pretended to read the newspaper while scrutinizing every single movement around him. He understood the rules of this new narrative perfectly. It was precisely 9 o'clock. The train carrying Princess Nasiris was about to arrive, and with it, utter chaos. Ivan was ready to step in and save the day once more. If anyone had Nasiris in their sights, this border station was the ideal venue for an ambush, as everything beyond it was a heavily guarded military zone. It was now or never. Observing the subtle shifts around the platform, Ivan Petrovich could only shake his head at the sheer incompetence before him. What absolute amateurs, he thought. Without concrete proof, he couldn't call for military reinforcements, which meant he had to handle these 3 suspicious figures all by himself. The man sitting on the nearby bench claimed to be waiting for a train, yet he had already allowed 3 consecutive trains to pass without making a move. The vegetable vendor was even worse. No sane person buys fresh vegetables at a deserted station at this hour, not to mention the guy couldn't stop nervously scanning his surroundings. Ivan walked up quietly behind the man on the bench, whose body went rigid the moment he realized someone was standing right over him. Before the stranger could even attempt to react, Ivan had already pressed the cold barrel of a pistol directly against the back of his neck. The man broke into a cold sweat, stammering in terror as he asked who on earth Ivan was. "Silence," Ivan ordered with an utterly terrifying calmness. Seeing the confrontation unfold, the other 2 disguised accomplices immediately snapped into high alert, dropping their axe and screaming at him. He yelled at him to freeze. How ridiculous, Ivan thought. In their angle, they shouldn't even have been able to see his weapon, but their instantaneous panic only confirmed that all 3 were in on the plot together. "Who you answer to?" Ivan demanded, his finger already tightening on the trigger. The man on the bench didn't even have time to scream before a clean gunshot tore through his head, painting the station wall with a sudden spray of crimson. Ivan was already assessing his next 2 targets. Had they been legitimate government agents, they would have declared their identities instead of shouting brainless questions. It was glaringly obvious they were working as a unit. Taking their guns, the remaining 2 men began firing wildly, screaming, "Kill him!" Yet Ivan moved like a flash of lightning, dodging their erratic gunfire with a terrifying, inhuman agility. To a seasoned veteran like him, these men were nothing more than bumbling amateurs firing blindly into the dark. Ivan closed the distance in a heartbeat, positioning himself directly in front of the gunman. Swinging his trusted hand axe, he parried an incoming strike and counterattacked in a single, fluid motion, a precise blow severing the forearm of the first attacker before the man could re-aim his weapon. Without losing momentum, Ivan lunged toward the second operative with chilling speed. What followed was absolute butchery. Within seconds, he had surgically neutralized the threat. Standing over the bloody scene, the veteran stared down at them with pure disdain. These fools had clearly never faced a real soldier. The sole survivor squirmed on the floor, weeping and clutching the bloody stump of his severed arm. Ivan stepped over him, offering a cold observation. The man would bleed out in under 3 minutes if he didn't stop the hemorrhaging. And to talk, where are the rest of you? Ivan demanded. Overcome by sheer panic, the survivor broke immediately, spilling everything. He confessed that 15 more heavily armed men were positioned further along the train tracks, begging for his life in exchange for cooperation. Ivan quickly deduced that these 3 had merely been the forward scouts. The real ambush lay further up the line. The wounded man continued to plead for mercy, insisting he could prove useful if spared and swearing they had only been told the train was carrying gold and high-value cargo from Drone. He was utterly desperate. Ivan looked down and asked if he truly had no idea who was actually riding those rails, and then swore on his life that he had told the absolute truth without mixing in a single lie. No, you did mix in one lie, Ivan replied calmly, stepping closer to finish the job. He drove his axe straight into the man's neck. The lie was that a rookie like him could ever be useful to someone like Ivan. Checking his pocket watch, the face read 9:53 a.m. Only minutes remained before the train's scheduled arrival. Ivan pulled on a pair of fresh leather gloves and set to work. In his extensive military experience, a trained member of the extermination squad required precisely 5 minutes to completely sanitize a crime scene, disposing of corpses and scrubbing bloodstains clean. At 9:58 a.m., the platform looked utterly pristine, as though not a single drop of blood had ever been spilled. 2 minutes left, Ivan adjusted his coat, perfectly composed and ready to greet the incoming train without leaving behind a single trace of the slaughter. Meanwhile, far away in the royal capital, Princess Elizabeth was inquiring about the latest reports on Banka. Dmitri informed her that Ivan seemed to suspect an imminent terrorist plot against the train, having predicted both the precise date and location with uncanny accuracy. Elizabeth wondered aloud if he maintained a private informant network, but Dmitri clarified that there had been zero suspicious contact over the past 4 years. Ivan simply possessed an uncanny knack for knowing things before they happened. Chuckling softly, Elizabeth instructed Dmitri not to miss a single one of Banka's moves, ordering that even his most trivial action be carefully recorded and reported directly to her desk. She wanted a complete log so she could review his every move at a moment's notice. She reminded Dmitri that 4 years ago, Banka had also set off on his suicide mission relying solely on his raw instincts and hunches. Even if his plan seemed like pure speculation from the outside, she remained convinced that a powerful rationale underpinned every single action he took. Meanwhile, out on a snow-covered bridge, a hidden hand prepared to press down on a detonator. I'm certain of it, the attacker thought to himself. Watching from a distance, Ivan understood the inner mechanics of these academy stories all too well. He knew that a train attack right before the start of the school term would never actually kill off central figures like Nazaris, who was currently waiting anxiously in her seat inside the carriage. Looking at the dynamite charges planted along the tracks, Ivan realized an event like this was nothing more than an opening tutorial, a warm-up phase designed for players to get used to the controls, which was precisely why he didn't bother trying to stop the blast itself. The leader of the raiders waited for a signal and pressed the button, sending a soft click reverberating through the air right before absolute chaos erupted. The explosion was brutal, sending shockwaves through the iron structure as the train began to derail violently. Ivan had never intended to stop the crash in the first place. Nazaris braced herself against the wall as her carriage buckled and shook, and Ivan firmly believed that these kinds of flashy heroics belonged to the story's actual protagonist. He had his own separate objectives: track down the organization bankrolling the ambush and erase them from the Academy's vicinity forever. Kicking into action under the cover of the howling blizzard, Ivan preferred operating from the shadows rather than engaging in a loud, drawn-out confrontation. Moving with silent stealth through the snow, he readied his weapons. Eradicating threats at their absolute root was, after all, the signature style of the extermination squad. Ivan took aim with icy composure as the train lay overturned and burning on the frozen ground, surrounded by total destruction. The raiders broke out into boisterous laughter, celebrating what they assumed would be an effortless fortune. Their leader shouted orders to hurry up and loot every piece of valuable cargo they could find to flip on the black market, but without warning, a streak of light cut through the dim sky. A bullet buzzed past the leader's ear, instantly halting his grand plans, while the man standing right beside him took a direct hit to the skull and dropped dead on the spot. Ivan noted to himself that getting rattled by a single shot was the undeniable mark of an amateur. Seeing their comrade collapse, the rest of the gang descended into utter panic as the leader roared in fury, frantically scanning the surrounding landscape and screaming, "Who the hell is out there?" Ivan casually observed their frantic reactions, concluding that these men were entirely incapable of detecting true danger. They couldn't even sense the line of fire aimed directly at their chests. Looking out calmly from the snowy haze, Ivan approached them and asked if the big guy was the one calling the shots. "Fire at him," the leader barked, and every surviving mercenary pulled their triggers simultaneously. Ivan didn't flinch, remaining completely unfazed as he focused on the incoming trajectories. He could read the direct lines of fire with absolute clarity. To a hardened veteran of his caliber, dodging incoming bullets was simple child's play. He knew firsthand that conventional firearms were practically useless against high-level warriors because the shooter's raw kill intent is far too exposed. Murderous intent travels along the path of the projectile, making firearms inherently predictable to anyone with real battle experience. While masking that intent using mana was a basic technique for melee combat, doing so with moving projectiles like arrows or bullets was nearly impossible. That was precisely why nobody in the legendary heroes party had ever relied on firearms. Only the truly strong survived in those high-tier battlefields. However, as an exception to the rule, everyone in the extermination squad cleared pistols, and even leaped into the air, firing his weapon mid-flight to gauge the true strength of his opponents, and another raider dropped dead from a surgical shot. Landing lightly on the snowy ground, even prepared to eliminate the remaining weaklings, his eyes glowing with an unnerving, icy detachment. Infuriated and hurling loud insults, the leader lunged forward, swinging his heavy weapon with all his might, but Ivan simply waited for the exact right moment. "Who sent you?" the leader roared. Ivan blocked the massive overhead strike with insulting ease, using his hand axe, instantly exploiting the open gap to deliver a swift, punishing blow that drew a pained grunt from the giant. It went up without hesitation. Ivan landed a brutal strike directly onto the leader's face, spraying blood across the snow. The gap in raw power was insurmountable. The force of the blow launched the huge man through the air until he slammed violently onto the frozen ground. Ivan hadn't even ruffled his clothes. He looked down at the leader writhing in pain on the snow, who, consumed by rage and embarrassment, spat out bitter threats. "I've memorized your face." "Just you wait." With terrifying composure, Ivan looked down at him. "So good at remembering faces," Ivan whispered, looming over the man like a dark shadow. "That's a relief." He made it abundantly clear that being recognized didn't frighten him in the slightest. To Ivan, this guy was nothing more than the low-level boss of a game's opening tutorial. Sweat broke out across the raider's forehead as he realized there was no escape. Finishing his axe, Ivan plainly laid out his intentions. "Ultimately, defeating you is the protagonist's job, so I don't plan on killing you. However, I know countless ways to maim someone without damaging their vital functions." With a glacial glare, he commanded the leader to spill anything useful he remembered right then and there. The scene shifted abruptly to a memory. "Absolutely not! You cannot follow me!" a firm voice shouted in front of a grand Nordic house. It was Naziris, utterly furious, sternly warning that she would sever all ties if she caught anyone tailing her on her journey. She turned and marched off with absolute resolve, her instrument case strapped to her back. Einar the Berserker watched her leave, deeply worried for her safety. "Naziris, that means," he thought. Suddenly, a sly smile broke across Einar's face. "It's fine as long as I don't get caught," he exclaimed. Einar immediately summoned his elite warriors, addressing them in a solemn, booming voice. "That is why I have gathered you all here today. Who among you is the warrior that will protect Naziris while remaining completely invisible?" Einar roared, searching for a volunteer among his ranks, and his men responded with wild, ferocious fervor. "I am here, brother." The loyalty in this group was absolute. Though these men were once ruthless killers, they were now embraced as brothers by their lord, King Einar, and it reminded them of their greatest hurdle. "Naziris knows all your faces. She would spot any of you instantly. Who among you is capable of pursuing a speeding train using nothing but his own 2 feet?" He continued to challenge them with a nearly impossible task. These were men who sought neither wealth nor glory, driven solely by pure, unadulterated loyalty to their chieftain. In the rugged lands of Drone, these elite shock troopers were known as the Housecarls, the loyal retainers of the king. "Perfect," Einar shouted in approval. Now he just needed to find someone who could actually enroll in St. Yansk University to keep an eye on her. "Now then, out of all of you, raise your hand if you're confident you can pass the written entrance exam." Einar asked, but an uncomfortable silence immediately settled over the room. For these battle-hardened warriors, the mere thought of a written exam was a form of torture far worse than death itself. "No way, I'd rather die," several of them muttered under their breath. Suddenly, a single hand was raised with absolute determination amidst the widespread hesitation. "I'll do it, Lord Einar," the volunteer declared. It was Mort, a housecarl built like a fortress with an unyielding gaze. "Don't worry. How hard could an exam possibly be?" he added with supreme confidence. "No, my brother," Einar exclaimed, deeply moved by Mort's courage, while the rest of the warriors roared in celebration of their comrade's bravery. "All right, go forth, brother," Einar bellowed. "Starting today, you are a first-year physical education student." "Yes," Mort shouted back in euphoria, solemnly swearing to protect the princess with his very life if necessary. 2 months prior, this man had begun his top-secret infiltration mission into the prestigious academy, and astonishingly, he managed to pass the entry tests and secure admission into the physical education department, leaving everyone stunned. Naturally, he had come dangerously close to failing the academic section, scraping by with a bare minimum passing score on the written test. One could practically see him suffering over basic numbers, and the professors could hardly believe his abysmal theoretical performance. But his admission was undisputed because Mort set an all-time historical record in the practical evaluation, possessing physical stamina that was nothing short of inhuman. Is he really just a student? Everyone wondered. And that was precisely how elite housecarl ended up enrolled in a university. Fast forward to a cold day in January, when his true trial began. After sprinting behind the speeding train for 2 whole days straight without food, sleep, or a moment's rest, Mort was still on his feet. "Wait for me," he screamed, running at a mind-boggling speed through the wilderness. "Which bastards dare lay a finger on my niece?" Mort was thirsty for blood. Turning to the present, inside the twisted remains of the train carriage, Naziris groaned in pain as she slowly regained consciousness. The impact had been severe. Ugh, what is happening? She asked herself in complete confusion, struggling to push herself up from among the debris and snow. Fear quickly took hold of her. It can't be bandits, she thought in terror, remembering the violent derailment. She felt utterly vulnerable. Because she had stormed off while forbidding anyone from following her, she now had not a single bodyguard by her side to protect her. What am I going to do? She lamented. Suddenly, her eyes caught sight of something amidst the wreckage. Ah! She gasped with a mixture of surprise and relief. It was her cello. She pulled it close and hugged it tightly, overwhelmed with relief to find it intact. Thank goodness, Kanang. I was so worried you were broken, she whispered softly to her instrument. Bam! A massive explosion echoed at the carriage entrance, making her jump in sheer fright. Someone was forcing their way inside, and a second later the heavy door sent flying by a devastating blow. Saris let out a scream of pure horror, fearing her end had finally come. Eek! She shrieked, cowering back. She watched with wide, terrified eyes as a heavy hand gripped the shattered doorframe. Ugh. A scarred man with a sinister glint in his eye stepped inside the carriage, uttering a threatening grunt. Nazaris knew she was in deep trouble. Well, look what we have here. Company, the man said with a wicked grin as his henchman peered in behind him, quickly sizing up Nazaris as nothing more than a helpless young girl. Nazaris trembled uncontrollably, turning her back to them and clutching her cello tightly to her chest, bracing for the absolute worst with no way to defend herself. Meanwhile, outside the train, the leader of the raiders was begging for his life under Ivan's boot. Just kill me, he screamed, unable to endure any more suffering. Ivan Petrovich stared down at him with ruthless coldness. All right, definitely not. You're not going to die, he said with an unsettling calm, brandishing his axe. Stop saying such terrifying things, Ivan added, bringing the sharp edge of his weapon closer. The raider leader shrieked in sheer desperation at the impending threat. The man's agony echoed across the snow-covered wasteland as Ivan initiated his unique method of interrogation. Stop! I can't take it anymore. Anything but that, the raider pleaded as Ivan poured a glowing green liquid directly onto his open wounds. The man twisted and writhed in indescribable agony. Ivan often reflected on what frontline soldiers hated most, and the answer was surprisingly neither the terrible mess hall food, nor their commanding officers, nor even the enemy. What they feared above all else were healing potions. Ivan continued pouring the liquid without a shred of remorse as the leader roared, "Gah! Just cut off my arm instead." The pain of instant, accelerated healing was exponentially worse than the original wound itself. Ivan recalled his younger days spent in the infirmary, remembering how the nurses used to treat him while patching him up. Don't say such horrible things. At this rate, we really will have to amputate your arm, they would tell him as he groaned. The nurses viewed him as a national treasure, but Ivan felt only pure torture. Who treats a national treasure like this? He used to think while screaming in pain during his immature years. Now hold on for one more bottle. If it hurts, tell me, the nurse would say with a sadistic smile, adding, though I won't stop anyway. This damn medicine forced the body to experience all the agonizing pain of a weeks-long recovery compressed into a single overwhelming instant. Ivan often compared its extreme stinging sensation to Korea's infamous Albathil. Having experienced its efficacy firsthand, Ivan had discovered a brand new application for the drug, earning the admiration of his comrades in the extermination squad for its sheer interrogation potential. The process was utterly brutal. Heal with a potion, interrogate, and heal again. An endless cycle of torment that never stopped until the victim spilled every secret. It was, in truth, the ultimate truth serum. The raider leader was completely broken, sobbing hysterically and begging for the sweet release of death. I don't know anything else. Just kill me, he whimpered, his body glowing under the magical effects of the healing magic. No, you have to live, Ivan replied coldly. He knew this guy was merely a mid-level tutorial miniboss, so there was no reason to kill him just yet. He still had to serve a larger narrative purpose. Ivan analyzed the tactical situation while the man continued to shriek. If the raider genuinely couldn't remember who had masterminded the terrorist attack, he was likely just a low-level pawn, or perhaps something far more sinister was at play. Could they have cast a cognitive block spell on him? Ivan wondered, his blue eyes gleaming with deep suspicion. The situation was proven to be far more complex than it initially appeared. Suddenly, Ivan's battle senses flared to maximum alert as he detected a subtle shift in the air. The line of fire, he thought, instantly calculating the trajectory of an incoming attack amidst the chaotic wreckage of the derailed train. Where is it pointing? He asked himself, visualizing the exact target. To the glabella. No, he muttered under his breath, bracing himself for whatever threat was about to strike. The real danger was about to reveal itself. A massive boulder plummeted at breakneck speed, aiming directly for Ivan Petrovich's face. It then shifted to the side just in the nick of time, the projectile whistling past him and shattering the earth where he had stood a second before. Turin observed the attack with icy composure, realizing that drawing his firearm would be useless against a threat like this. Where rocks came flying through the air with devastating force, proving that the attacker was no ordinary mercenary. The kinetic impact of the projectiles threw up a dense curtain of dust and debris, but as the cloud cleared, Ivan's silhouette remained standing upright, calmly waiting for the smoke to settle. He could feel that his opponent possessed an ability similar to his own when it came to reading lines of fire and trajectories. Unfazed, Ivan commanded his aggressor to step out from hiding once and for all. A heavily muscular man landed with brute force on the cracked ground, ready for confrontation. Chested and wielding two massive battle axes, Mort Dixon was furious, demanding to know how Ivan dared lay a finger on his niece. Ivan quickly evaluated the situation, realizing this wasn't the ultimate villain of the arc, but rather the hero's uncle. In turn adjusted his grip on his tactical axes, bracing for close quarters combat, and deciding that this giant would be his immediate challenge to overcome. It swung a wild, boulder-cleaving strike, the collision of their weapons spraying sparks and unleashing a shockwave across the snowy clearing. Ivan found it strange for a common bandit to possess such absurd physical strength. It pressed his attack relentlessly, his eyes glowing with a supernatural intensity, and Ivan blocked a heavy lateral swing, noting the strange, potent energy surging through the red-headed giant's body. They locked into a rapid exchange of furious blows and parries that echoed loudly through the mountains. It executed a massive overhead chop that Ivan barely managed to dodge by stepping back just enough, causing the veteran to question whether his narrative predictions for this encounter had been flawed. His metal clashed once more, illuminating the snowbound scene. Ivan mentioned Princess Naziris' name, driving the tension even higher. He yelled in desperation, swearing he had to save his beloved niece, while Ivan readied himself for the next assault as the giant charged in blind rage. Meanwhile, a squad of bandits had Naziris cornered near the derailed train carriages. One of the thugs sneered at the young girl, assuming she was nothing more than a helpless survivor. He grabbed her forcefully, but the sound of splintering wood and metal filled the air. Naziris looked down in horror at her shattered cello, whispering a heartbroken apology to her precious instrument. Suddenly, the girl slammed one of the thugs against the side of the train carriage with terrifying superhuman strength. The remaining bandits froze in place, utterly stunned to see their comrade neutralized so effortlessly. Trembling as she clutched the broken pieces of her beloved Kanang, tears welled in Naziris' eyes as she screamed at them for destroying her most cherished possession. In that moment, the fierce, savage fury she had inherited from her father, Einar the Berserker, completely took over. She bade a silent farewell to the instrument that had brought her so much joy before turning her gaze upon the terrified men. The bandits began to panic, shouting at one another to turn and run. Naziris began swinging her heavy cello case like a giant battle axe, her eyes blazing crimson as she swore to avenge her instrument by slaughtering every last one of them. One of the thugs frantically begged for mercy from Ivan Petrovich, who was watching the chaotic scene unfold in mild surprise as the bandit was launched high into the air by a direct hit from the enraged princess. As the thieves fled in absolute horror, Ivan and Mort Dixon simply stood side by side, watching the utter carnage unfold. In the middle of the mess, Ivan and Mort cleared up the misunderstanding by shouting over the noise, with the red-headed warrior frantically asking if his niece Naziris was truly safe. Both men fell silent for a brief moment, processing the chaotic sequence of events. Ivan analyzed the turn of events through the lens of Academy story tropes. Train attacks never actually kill off main characters if an ally is nearby. Until he was pondering these narrative rules, Mort Dixon froze, realizing that Ivan was actually Naziris' protector rather than her enemy. Ivan explained with complete calm that the whole thing was a misunderstanding, and that he had merely been interrogating the operative he had captured earlier. Return casually noted that pouring healing potions onto raw wounds was a classic Special Forces interrogation technique to extract information rapidly. It scratched the back of his neck, sheepishly admitting he should have talked before jumping into a full-scale axe fight. The giant suddenly perked up as he sensed a familiar presence approaching through the rubble. Naziris emerged from the train's wreckage, her eyes still glinting ominously while clutching the remains of her instrument. It rushed toward her, relieved beyond words to see her alive, while the girl was taken aback to find her uncle standing in the middle of such a disaster. Even observed their reunion in silence, recalling that the first time he had ever seen this girl was 7 years ago during the war. The memory of a much younger Naziris crying out for her uncle flashed through his mind, making him realize just how much she had grown. The present-day girl, however, did not stop complaining and wrestling with Mort, proving she still possessed a prickly, difficult personality. Deciding it was the perfect moment to withdraw before anyone recognized him and made things unnecessarily complicated, even vanished without a trace. Naziris asked her uncle if there hadn't been someone else standing right beside him a second ago, leaving Mort Dixon lost in thought. It mentally reviewed the incredible skill and composure of the man he had just fought. That combat style was unmistakably identical to the elite special forces of Krasilov. He recalled the precise, lethal way Ivan wielded his hand axes, a style painfully familiar from his old wartime comrades. The pieces finally clicked together in his head, and only one legendary name came to mind: Ivan Petrovich, the ultimate war reserve of the heroes. As they walked along the railway tracks under the setting sun, Mort asked his niece if she happened to remember a man named Ivan. Naziris smiled with rare nostalgia, describing him as a kind, handsome, and truly wonderful person. As the sun dipped below the horizon over the massive railway bridge, Mort quietly mentioned that he had heard rumors that very man had died 2 years ago. Years later, Ivan, now far away from the site of the disaster, let out a deep sigh of relief, thankful that his thick beard and the relentless passage of time had rendered him completely unrecognizable to his former comrades in arms. An internal system interface confirmed that his objective to secure the young noble girl had been an absolute success. Naziris and her uncle continued onward from the train wreck, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives in the kingdom of Krasilov. The scene then shifted to the St. Basilissa orphanage, an imposing yet peaceful sanctuary standing tall under the clear blue sky. Inside his office, Ivan carefully reviewed a a series of high-priority documents confirming Nazaris's safe arrival in the capital. He attentively read through intelligence reports on Isabel, the daughter of the famed hero Maximilian, as well as profiles on various other young nobles slated to arrive soon. Gazing thoughtfully at a portrait of the Archmage Beelgreen's daughter, even meticulously analyzed the powerful new figures entering the story's main stage. He also received updates regarding Lucia, the elite disciple of Enrique, who had already begun covert operations within the capital's borders. Exhausted by the overwhelming volume of tutorial events he still had to oversee, Ivan sank heavily into his leather chair. Distractedly twirling his pen, his mind drifted far away from intricate geopolitical plots and high-stakes military maneuvers. He began jotting down a purely personal wish list titled Things to Eat When I Return to Earth, starting off with a steaming bowl of kimchi stew. With intense determination, he added tteokbokki to the top of the list, circling it several times as his absolute highest priority while vividly imagining a bowl of traditional, spicy rice cakes like the ones sold right in front of schools back home. As Ivan released a long, longing sigh for his true home, he remained blissfully unaware that someone was playfully watching him from outside his third-story window. He jumped in utter shock when he noticed a face pressed directly against the glass. It was Priscilla, one of the young residents of the orphanage, beaming at him with a radiant smile from the exterior wall. Completely bewildered, Ivan threw open the window, loudly questioning how on earth she had managed to scale the sheer face of the building without any climbing gear, genuinely wondering if wall scaling had somehow been added to the orphanage's official physical education curriculum. Priscilla proudly boasted about winning a game of hide-and-seek as she strolled alongside a resigned Ivan, who could only plead with her to use the hallways next time to avoid a fatal accident. Down in the sun-drenched courtyard, the orphans were engaged in a secret, highly popular game among themselves, trying to sneak up on the director without tripping his razor-sharp senses. The children spoke reverently of Ivan Petrovich, knowing him as a figure shrouded in mystery who possessed near-superhuman reflexes. A close-up of Ivan's intense blue eyes revealed a hyper-attuned level of sensory perception and focus that far exceeded normal human limitations. It showcased his astounding prowess by effortlessly catching objects thrown at his back with pinpoint accuracy, without even turning his head. The kids watched in awe as their director easily uncovered every single one of their hiding spots. Emerging from behind a tree with a faint blue aura lingering around him, Ivan towered over one of the little ones with natural commanding authority, lifting the child up by the back of his collar with effortless ease, displaying an expression that balanced stern discipline with a fiercely protective paternal instinct. Despite his intimidating physique and battlefield scars, Ivan was the children's undisputed favorite playmate due to his gentle, caring nature. As the kids ran toward him shouting joyfully, "Director!" Ivan privately resolved to train them properly so that one day they might grow strong enough to surpass him. Watching them play in the yard, he silently wished for them to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet before they eventually had to leave the safety of the sanctuary. With only 2 weeks remaining before the next generation of heroes was set to depart, Ivan desperately craved a brief moment of freedom, but his sharp instincts warned him that trouble was brewing. The calm of the night was suddenly shattered in a dark, damp basement dripping with tension. Priscilla found herself bound tightly to a wooden chair, facing her abductors with surprising courage as she boldly warned them of her director's terrifying wrath. The kidnappers sneered and mocked her cruelly, asking who this mysterious director was that she kept bragging about. A defiant, fearless smile born of absolute trust, Priscilla clearly pronounced the name of her protector, Ivan Petrovich. The kidnappers fell silent for a brief second, processing the name before breaking into hysterical mocking laughter, entirely dismissing the threat. One of the men laughed until he shed tears, ridiculing her by pointing out that Ivan Petrovich was literally the most common, generic name in the entire kingdom of Krasnov. Priscilla's confidence began to waver as an icy, suffocating dark presence suddenly manifested behind her. A mysterious woman with long dark hair, sharp elven ears, and a blood-red aura stepped out from the shadows, inquiring about the name with a chilling, predatory interest. The young girl watched in sheer horror as the newcomer radiated a bloodlust so intense it felt as though the air itself had frozen solid, causing Priscilla to whisper Ivan's name with a trembling voice. Meanwhile, back at his office, Ivan stood holding one of Priscilla's small garments, his imposing silhouette framed against the moonlight, pouring through the window. As the frantic orphanage caretakers rushed in to report the girl's abduction, Ivan calmly confirmed that he already knew precisely who was behind it. He examined a distinct black handprint stamped with a cross on the cloth, the unmistakable signature of a notorious criminal syndicate. Ivan realized he would have to clear his schedule, as the person who left that message was a crucial, deadly figure from his dark military past. The mark on the fabric was no ordinary threat. It was a personal summons from his former master. Ivan remembered his grueling days in the elite extermination squad, a lethal unit originally created by that very same elven woman. The elf's sadistic smirk in the shadows made it clear that she had never intended to retire from her life as a master assassin as she had once promised. Her identity was finally laid bare. Enrique, the legendary Blade of Shadows from the original Heroes Party. Acting swiftly, Ivan slipped into the dark underground canals of southern Prichchenkaya, tracking her down into a secret subterranean dungeon built beneath the city. Enrique herself, With his senses sharpened by years of relentless warfare, it did not take long for Ivan to pinpoint the exact location, quickly realizing that the very design of the subterranean entrance felt as though it had been tailor-made specifically for him. The underground chamber was filled with grand statues commemorating the legendary heroes of the Great War, including the enigmatic nameless hero. To this day, citizens still spoke with utter bewilderment about the morning the hero's central monument mysteriously vanished from the main square without leaving behind a single trace. It was an astonishingly bold heist executed right in the beating heart of the capital, leaving the populace whispering endless theories about what could have transpired. In place of the stolen statue, the perpetrator had left only a crude wooden sign signed by Enrique, fiercely asserting her absolute right to mourn her fallen dead. Ivan stared up at the stolen statue inside the hidden dungeon, noting with a dark, disturbing chill its uncanny physical resemblance to himself. Entering the base of the monument, he gazed melancholically at the commemorative inscription that seemed to honor his own forgotten sacrifices. The final message honored the eternal glory of those whose names had been systematically erased by history in the name of all fallen comrades. In a stone slab nearby, the names of Elizabeth Kirillovna Krasilov and Enrique Sergeyevna were permanently engraved into the cold surface. Ivan lowered his head in a gesture of profound respect and suppressed sorrow for the brave brothers in arms who had departed far too soon. Standing motionless before the monument, Ivan Petrovich remained lost in the bloody memories of past battles. With a heavy, ragged sigh, he silently acknowledged his true place among the ranks of those who had sacrificed everything for the cause. Suddenly, a soft beam of light pierced through the gloom of the dungeon, revealing the threshold to a far more private and luxurious inner chamber. Ivan cast one final glance at the statue of the nameless hero before striding forward into the impending confrontation he had spent years avoiding. Stepping at the doorway of the opulent salon, he immediately sensed the unmistakable presence of someone he knew all too well. At the far end of a long dining table, a stunning female figure sat casually enjoying a hot cup of coffee, awaiting his arrival with an unsettling, predatory calm. Ivan took a seat opposite her, his face hardened by deep suspicion as he verified that his host had not forgotten a single detail of their shared past. But the woman broke the heavy silence by asking how long it had been since their last face-to-face meeting, noting that 7 long years had passed. The mysterious elf introduced herself as Sergeyevna Enrique, the former master thief of the legendary hero's party, addressing Ivan by his old military moniker. Tales recounted how Enrique had once betrayed and slain the powerful vampire who turned her, putting an end to a centuries-long bloody massacre before eventually joining the hero's crusade. Despite her revered status as a savior, history remembered Enrique as a ruthless executioner who had claimed countless lives under the guise of classified assassination missions. Ivan locked eyes with her, acknowledging her as his former grandmaster and the cold-blooded mastermind behind the creation of the extermination squad. Enrique noticed that Ivan had not touched the coffee she poured for him, asking with cruel irony if he feared the drink might be poisoned. Ignoring her playful banter, Ivan cut straight to the chase, sternly demanding to know the exact whereabouts of young Priscilla. Ivan responded with absolute coldness, noting that he didn't care if the coffee went cold since he came from a country where iced coffee was the norm. A fanged smirk crept across Enrique's face as she mocked her former disciple's obvious hostility. Ivan clenched his fist upon the wooden table while Enrique reminded him of one of her oldest lessons regarding the true nature of hostility. A close-up of Enrique's crimson eye reinforced her chilling warning. Only prey show their claws so obviously. Enrique assured him that the young girl was safe for the time being, claiming she had not yet found any reason to bite her. Suddenly, a spectral serpent of burning red energy coiled tightly around Ivan's neck, manifesting the pure, suffocating bloodlust emanating from the ancient elf. Ivan's face tensed under the crushing pressure of Enrique's magic as she demanded an honest answer to her questions. Multiple shadowy serpents materialized from the darkness, while Enrique questioned Ivan's true motives regarding the orphans at St. Basilissa. Enrique's expression turned fierce, her eyes gleaming with supernatural fury as she interrogated Ivan about his sudden, out-of-character interest in philanthropy. Despite the lethal threat encircling him, Ivan remained firmly seated, holding his ground in a fierce battle of wills inside the opulent hall. Enrique, the elf master, was deeply incensed that Ivan had trained a stealth operative and sent her into her domain without prior warning. Her, establishing a training ground for covert agents right in her own backyard, was practically an overt declaration of war. She paused, analyzing the tense situation with calculated calm, ultimately admitting that his secret actions had genuinely hurt her pride. Meanwhile, Ivan sat quietly behind his thick, unkempt beard, remaining completely silent, a rugged look that Enrique inwardly judged as a century out of style. She had invited him over to resolve things without bloodshed, yet Ivan's icy gaze screamed, "Touch me and you die," leaving her struggling to grasp what he was truly planning. Ivan simply observed her in silence, mentally calculating just how much of his overarching plan he should reveal to her. As it turned out, the kingdom of Krasilov was far less peaceful than it appeared on the surface, currently fractured in two by a bitter struggle for the throne. On one side stood the warlike crown prince, and on the other stood Princess Elizabeth, who sought internal stability and peace. To avert absolute disaster, the princess had deployed a secret agent who had successfully faked his own death, even himself, all to protect vital political figures behind the scenes. Ivan knew Enrique suspected he was executing a top-secret mission on behalf of the princess, princess, but as she pressed him on his exact plans, he began to doubt whether Enrique's loyalty to Elizabeth remained intact. A troubling thought crossed his mind that she might have secretly defected to the Crown Prince's faction. The tension in the room skyrocketed as the two legendary warriors silently sized each other up. Ivan finally broke the heavy silence by casually mentioning he had heard she was training a young female disciple to enter the academy. Dmitri smirked unnervingly, exposing a single sharp canine, clearly displeased by his intelligence network. Ivan nonchalantly added that his high-profile client was extremely interested in that girl and had ordered him to personally handle her. He stated that if Enrique wasn't aligned with the Crown Prince, she should easily understand why he was taking control of the situation. Enrique's perspective, however, this sounded like a direct, ruthless threat to eliminate her prized student. Furious, the master assassin slammed her hands onto the table and stood up, unable to believe this man had the sheer audacity to threaten her disciple right to her face. Enrique shouted for Lucia to enter the room immediately. The door swung open as Lucia cheerfully responded from outside. Lucia stepped inside with a bright, sunny smile, leaving Ivan completely stunned. Enrique instructed her to greet her senior colleague. Ivan couldn't help but ask if the girl even realized that her master wasn't human. Lucia, without losing her smile, replied with total conviction that her master was obviously human, explaining that humanity is defined by one's actions and dedication to protecting the country, not by physical appearance. Ivan stood there silently processing her answer. An intense silence once again filled the grand chamber. He realized that even though the kingdom harbored immense prejudice against non-human races, this young girl possessed an incredibly open and noble mind. Enrique gripped the armrest of her chair, declaring that Lucia was her greatest pride and joy. Suddenly, Enrique unleashed a terrifying aura of fiery energy, stating that despite everything, she really didn't want to be forced to kill Ivan. Undaunted, Ivan calmly reached behind his back for his tactical axe. Sheathing the weapon with icy composure, he sternly asked the master assassin where her true loyalty lay. Their opposing energies collided in a violent spectacle of blue and red power that caused the entire room to tremble. Enrique abruptly froze in confusion, asking if Ivan wasn't the one aligned with Alexen. Ivan stared back with a completely bewildered expression, asserting that he had never even seen that man smile in his entire life. The suffocating tension vanished in an instant, leaving both legendary warriors staring at each other as if caught in a completely absurd misunderstanding. A deathly silence blanketed the richly decorated hall. Sinking back into her chair in utter exhaustion, Enrique complained that talking to Ivan was a massive headache because of his abysmal communication skills. She cheerfully chimed in, saying she thought the two of them made a wonderful pair, which caused Enrique to nearly explode from sheer embarrassment. Ivan sat back down and returned to his tea, privately reflecting that he really ought to charge Princess Elizabeth overtime for this ordeal. In the end, the looming threat seemed to have been resolved, at least for the time being. Ivan concluded that the young disciple would remain completely safe under Enrique's personal protection. Lucia looked happier than ever, while her master looked as though she had barely survived an exhausting interrogation. Watching them together, Ivan noted that they resembled a loving mother and daughter far more than a master and student. At the very least, the meeting had concluded peacefully. Ivan calmed down. Enrique demanded to know why on earth Ivan had gone around teaching high-level stealth techniques to a group of innocent orphans. Ivan clarified that he hadn't taught them a thing. The children were simply working hard on their own initiative to acquire useful skills so they could find decent jobs after graduating. Ivan reiterated the fact that those young kids had somehow managed to master stealth entirely on their own. Ivan reflected back on his long walk with Priscilla, realizing just how far away this subterranean hideout was from the orphanage. He wondered why the young girl had taken such immense risks, only to end up drawing the attention of Enrique's dangerous subordinates in the first place. Priscilla had paused for a moment during their walk, calling out to the director with a trembling voice. With tears brimming in her eyes, she had asked him if he was secretly preparing to leave them and go away somewhere far. Ivan recalled how a government agent had tracked him down after 2 peaceful years dedicated entirely to running the orphanage. His mind had already been wandering elsewhere, happily drafting lists of Korean comfort food for the day he would finally return to his original world. Looking at the weeping girl, he understood that she had been terrified he was going to abandon everything because of her actions. With a heavy heart, Ivan confirmed to her that he would likely be leaving the place soon. Priscilla stood in frozen shock, her eyes staring blankly into the distance as the painful news sank in. The young girl broke down into desperate tears, weeping frantically and begging him not to go, truly believing that without him, her home would simply cease to exist. Ivan realized that to a war orphan like her, he represented the only true sense of safety and security she had left in her life. As it turned out, Priscilla had originally run off into the city to search for a job, and because she walked so silently without making a single sound, Enrique's men had mistaken her for an operative trained in stealth. Realizing the tragic absurdity of the situation, Ivan gently draped his heavy coat over her trembling shoulders while she softly asked where he would go. Internally, he admitted to himself how desperately he wished to leave this fantasy world behind as soon as possible. Pausing for a moment as he gazed out toward the city bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, he promised Priscilla that he was heading to Secyansky University and assured her that he would return to visit them often so they wouldn't have to worry. Priscilla smiled brightly through her tears, profoundly relieved to learn that this was not a final goodbye. Ivan reflected on all the immense effort and care he had poured into building up the orphanage, deciding he would stay for 3 more years before departing for good. Knowing that the upcoming entrance exam in November was an absolute nightmare, nightmare, he knew they had to begin preparing immediately. Invigorated and driven, Priscilla returned to tell the other children that if they managed to gain admission to the academy, they would be able to see the director again in just a year. Behind the director's back, she made it crystal clear to the rest of the orphans that the rules of the game remained the exact same as always. Whoever succeeded in getting admitted to the school would win the challenge. Thus, every single orphan at St. Basilissa Orphanage threw themselves into grueling, intensive training to secure their place at the university. Back in the present, Ivan sat at his desk reviewing his official documents, feeling that everything was finally moving along smoothly. He marked as completed the assignment concerning Naziris, the daughter of Einar the Berserker, and followed up by ticking off Lucia, the promising disciple of the vampire thief from the legendary heroes party. Ivan fell into deep thought, meticulously analyzing his next tactical move with utter seriousness. Meanwhile, a train sliced across the open countryside at top speed, carrying the heavy weight of destiny within its passenger cars. The focus shifted to a gleaming silver sword, the iconic symbol of a legendary lineage and burden. Isabel, the daughter of the great hero, rode silently inside the train, staring out at the passing landscape with a sorrowful, melancholy expression, the look of someone bearing an immense, crushing responsibility solely because of her bloodline. Deep within the shadows of the surrounding forest, a monstrous creature lurked from the high canopy, waiting for the opportunistic moment to strike. Legend held that the original heroes party was essentially a high-level assassination squad tasked with infiltrating deep behind enemy lines. The flashback revealed the hero appearing in a flash of radiant blue light, facing off against his opponents with icy, absolute composure. For those legendary warriors, discretion and stealth had been fundamental survival tools to navigate the brutal war. In the heat of battle, the hero blocked a vicious strike with a casual ease that bordered on the absurd, prompting Enrique in her combat form to sarcastically mock him, asking why he didn't just shout at the top of his lungs that he was humanity's shining hope. Enrique watched with a mix of curiosity and deep suspicion, sensing that something far beyond the ordinary was unfolding. With fierce determination, the hero Maximilian charged forward into the fray, roaring that he had no intention of losing this fight. A dazzling web of light-infused sword strikes unleashed into the air, showcasing a swordsmanship technique that defied all human logic. After finishing what he nonchalantly referred to as a decent warm-up, Maximilian wiped the sweat from his brow while Enrique screamed at him in a furious rage, complaining that he had nearly broken her wrist. His brutal strength. The group gathered together, utterly exhausted. Maximilian asked Patricia to use her healing magic while someone else felt deeply insulted by his casual remarks. Einar the Berserker let out a thunderous laugh, savoring the tension and chaos as only a warrior of his legendary class could. Enveloped in roaring flames of pure power, Einar proclaimed that the men of Drone always live, leaving an indelible mark upon the world. Beneath the vast starry night sky, the party gazed at the imposing silhouette of the mountain they had just challenged. A single stroke of immeasurable power split the mountain's peak cleanly in two, illuminating the night with its searing trail. Looming right before them was the army of the Demon King, an endless tide of foul monsters and terrifying dragons led by mechanical generals. Their subsequent retreat was pure chaos. The party ran desperately while hordes of dark creatures snapped closely at their heels. Ivan recalled that absurd escape with deep bitterness, remembering how they fled for their lives from the Iron Dragon General and the overwhelming forces of evil. A solitary star blazed with unusual intensity in the night sky, and the hero pointed toward that shining light as if marking the ultimate destination of their long, treacherous journey. With a radiant smile despite his bleeding wounds, Maximilian proudly declared that he had managed to split the heavens themselves. Einar bragged about splitting a mountain while the rest of the exhausted team tried to catch their breath after the brutal battle. As Enrique and Einar squabbled over how difficult it was to cleave massive structures with information magic, Ivan privately concluded that the hero's party was nothing more than a nest of dangerous lunatics. Yet among them all, Maximilian was the one who burned the brightest. He was the absolute center of all hope, a man capable of risking everything and splitting the night sky just so he could gaze at the stars. He admitted to himself that he had never particularly liked those brilliantly shining heroes. The very man went on to slay the Demon King 4 years ago, only to vanish into thin air, severing every tie with the world he had just saved. The world continued to worship the legend of the hero, but everyone seemed to be forgetting the human being named Maximilian. At the present, Ivan traveled aboard the train while an intelligence agent nervously asked him if anything was bothering him. Ivan silently observed the men surrounding him, feeling that the entire situation was becoming increasingly absurd. He let out a heavy sigh upon realizing that a deeply troublesome matter had reared its head once again. Do you remember the day he returned after thwarting the surprise terrorist attack against Naziris, an outcome no one had anticipated? An intelligence officer had asked him in utter astonishment how he had been able to accurately predict the exact time, day, and location of the attack. The officer openly suspected that Ivan had been running a private, highly covert spy network of his own during his years of retirement. Driven by genuine curiosity, the agent begged him to reveal how he had managed to build such a massive intelligence apparatus right under the government's nose without them ever finding out. In reality, Ivan had simply applied standard war tropes, but to them, it must have appeared as though he commanded a shadowy transnational organization. He chose to offer no explanations. After all, true authority stems from mystery, and he had no obligation to enlighten them. However, that unearned reputation brought annoying consequences. He now had to deal with the unwanted support of 5 exceedingly incompetent agents. Ivan noted with growing irritation that the agents were monitoring him in the most painfully obvious and botched manner imaginable. He wondered why on earth intelligence agents were wearing identical uniforms in the first place, and to make matters worse, sitting together in an otherwise empty carriage, making themselves instantly recognizable to anyone with eyes. He simply could not tolerate such amateurish work. Ivan pondered how he could ever retire in peace when the current generation of agents was so incredibly sloppy and inexperienced. Radiating an unmistakable aura of command and suppressed fury, he sternly reminded them of how things were done back in his day. The train continued its relentless march, spewing dense clouds of dark smoke into the clear blue sky as it thundered along the iron rails, the rhythmic metallic clacking marking the pace of a journey that promised to be far more chaotic than planned. Intelligence agents bowed out, taking leave of Sir Petrovic and scrambling to obey his orders under his harsh, unrelenting gaze. In an aura of formidable resolve, Ivan warned them that their true intentions must always remain hidden in the deepest shadows. The agents fled in absolute terror, whining among themselves that Ivan was a terrifying monster capable of delivering an intense tactical lecture for 18 straight hours without breaking a sweat. Ivan watched them scurry away down the station platform, deeply satisfied to finally be rid of their clumsy surveillance. He reflected that even though Dmitri had wanted to keep tabs on him, Ivan had turned the tables, giving them a perfect excuse to leave while imparting some desperately needed education. In his mind's eye, the image of Oscar, the son of the heroic knight Gel, flashed briefly. The shining young man in polished armor was now safely under the escort of those very agents. Ivan felt he had killed 2 birds with 1 stone, successfully shaking off his bumbling tail while securing proper protection for the offspring of his former comrades. Meanwhile, Isabel strode along the station platform carrying her heavy combat gear, hiding her face behind a look of profound annoyance. Since safely aboard the train, Isabel settled into her seat, staring blankly out into the void with a somber, distant demeanor. Resting her cheek against her gloved hand, the overwhelming boredom and frustration of the journey reflected clearly in her emerald green eyes. Suddenly, a pale, elegantly dressed man with maroon hair tied neatly behind his back approached Isabel, attempting to act pleasant and welcoming. Isabel reacted with violent hostility, slapping his hand away with a gesture of absolute, unadulterated contempt. Her eyes blazing with fury, she barked at the useless idiot to keep his mouth shut, openly displaying her volatile, razor-sharp temper. The pale man maintained a servile, placating smile despite the stinging insult, offering a sly apology with a false humility that thinly veiled his true sinister intentions. Isabel demanded that he get the hell out of her sight, sinking back into her foul mood as she glared bitterly out the carriage window. The polished man withdrew in silence, shutting the door behind him with an unnerving, deliberate slowness. The moment he was safely alone, his polite composure melted away into a monstrous, bloodthirsty grin of pure hatred, revealing his true identity as a vicious centurion demon thirsting for slaughter. The express train surged forward at full speed from its origin point, venturing deep into the heavily fortified military regions surrounding the front lines of the war. Ivan quietly observed his fellow passengers. Logically, the intense military presence in the area should have guaranteed a smooth and safe trip. Nevertheless, Ivan had meticulously memorized the regional map beforehand, identifying the exact 3 tactical points where an ambush would actually be feasible, the map of the railway network glowing in his mind with bright red circles marking high-risk ambush zones. By dusk, they had crossed the first dangerous stretch of the railway. Ivan remained hyper-vigilant, but the train passed through without incident. As night fell, they navigated the second high-risk section, an ideal terrain for swift bandit ambushes, yet an eerie silence persisted. Ivan tightened his grip on his pistol with absolute resolve, his senses razor-sharp in the dim glow of the carriage. With his icy blue eyes gleaming with a cold luster, Ivan announced that the train had finally entered the last and most perilous leg of the journey. The night train churned heavily along the iron rails, the tension turning almost tangible inside the silent, darkened carriage. In another compartment, Ivan's mind, burdened by the memories of his original life as a modern Korean boy named Kamonu, stared blankly into the abyss while surrounded by oblivious passengers, wondering if his tactical calculations had failed him. He had assumed this opening tutorial event would follow the standard template of an Academy Stories train attack, but something felt deeply off. Glancing at the metallic interior, he doubted his own foresight. In typical Academy narratives, events were predictable, but this felt terrifyingly unscripted. He ground his teeth as paranoia set in, cursing his luck at the terrifying thought that this world might not play by the rules he knew. Enveloped in a chaotic crimson aura, he wondered if this damned fantasy realm even offered a real ending for him. Outside, total chaos erupted. Hysterical passengers fled down the corridor screaming that a bearded man was firing a gun. Ivan recalled the memory of the hero smiling after the final battle. Perhaps that man had simply finished his role and returned to his original world. Ivan's eyes burned with intensity as he pondered what had truly become of the world that very hero had abandoned to its fate. A vivid memory of his previous life flashed in his mind. A frightened, spectacled young boy. "What about me?" he questioned inwardly. Locomotive spewed heavy clouds of steam on the night platform, marking a destination that felt utterly inescapable. His hands trembled violently as he clutched his seat. He loathed this place and refused to spend another single minute in this fantasy world. Leaning his head against the cold window glass, his reflection briefly revealed his original, true identity. He just wanted to sleep for a week in a real bed and eat a decent meal. His past self screamed in sheer desperation from beyond the pain, utterly fed up with the primitive lack of comforts in this magical era. In the reflection, his past self clutched his own throat as if suffocating. The desperate urge to escape was so violent it caused him physical pain. The purple light flared briefly in his eyes, snapping him out of his mental breakdown just as the structural glass of his mind shattered violently. Pneumonia had just broken under the crushing pressure. A massive explosion illuminated the interior of the train with blinding fury. Ivan barely had time to cover his eyes as twisted metal sheared apart and shattered glass rained through the air. The carriage disintegrated in an instant as a violent fireball consumed the train, tearing it into fiery fragments amid the pitch-black night. There was no turning back. The wrecked carriages began plunging over the edge of the cliff, falling straight toward absolute disaster. Isabel screamed in terror as she plummeted into the abyss. Panic seized everyone, but something within Ivan clicked. Ivan Petrovic took absolute control, his mind turning as cold as ice as every trace of fear evaporated from his eyes. Debris rained down from the night sky, vividly recalling the brutal, frozen winters of his military past. Stabilizing himself in midair with a lethal glare, he knew that the tutorial was far from over, and that his instincts had not betrayed him. His formidable silhouette cut across the full moon as he dived directly toward the flaming wreckage of the fallen train. Gritting his teeth, he was determined to reach the end of this story at any cost. The train lay thoroughly mangled at the base of the jagged cliff, enveloped in thick plumes of smoke and burning metallic wreckage as snow began to softly dust the scene of destruction. Isabel slowly regained consciousness on the frozen ground, groaning in agonizing pain from the sheer force of the impact. Containing her eyes with great effort, she wondered what on earth had just happened and how she was still breathing. She heard a weak, trembling voice asking if she was awake, calling out to her with profound reverence. Looking up in horror as a heavy drop of warm blood fell directly onto her neck, she discovered that Sir August was shielding her with his own body, completely covered in deep bleeding wounds. She recalled past moments where she had constantly questioned and insulted him, unable to fathom why he would ever sacrifice himself for her now. Beneath the heavy iron debris, Sir August implored her to run immediately, knowing with absolute certainty that the attack had been targeted directly at her. Isabel stared at him in disbelief, calling him an utter idiot for saving someone he clearly disliked. The knight could barely draw breath, but she screamed at him that if he was doing this to gain favor with her father, he was wasting his time. That man cared about no one. Her eyes trembled as she witnessed the unyielding resolve in the dying knight's gaze, realizing her harsh words would not make him back down. Sir August weakly confessed that he had never sought the hero's approval. He was simply fulfilling his sacred duty to protect the hero's daughter. To him, Isabel was the sole remaining ray of hope left behind after her father had vanished. He uttered her father's name, Maximilian, as he strained every muscle to keep her safe beneath his weight, leaving Isabel panicking, utterly unable to process the overwhelming emotions and chaos surrounding her. Ivan observed Sir August with a rare mix of quiet respect and tactical detachment, noting his admirable determination. The knight lay broken and hemorrhaging on the ground, yet he had not let go of Isabel for a single second. With him forward, the veteran stood over them and asked the knight for his name. Through mouthfuls of blood, August answered with great difficulty, and Ivan formally introduced himself. Now August understood the true caliber of the man standing before them, though he never took his eyes off him. As August struggled for breath, Ivan bluntly asked him, "Do you want to live?" Without waiting for an answer, Ivan produced a glass vial filled with a luminous, glowing green liquid, sternly warning the knight that a high-potency healing potion was going to hurt like absolute hell. August endured the excruciating agony with an iron will as the magical formula forcibly knit his flesh back together. Isabel silently swore never to forget this moment as the knight began to scream in unadulterated torment. In his delirious state, the overwhelming pain caused August to frantically blur out top-secret accounting and financial records of his knightly order just to ensure they would save the girl. August was completely out of his mind, his eyes bloodshot and wild, leaving Isabel in utter disbelief at his incoherent babbling. "Slap!" Isabel delivered a stinging slap across his face, leaving a bright red mark. "Don't be an idiot," she yelled, trying to shock him back to sanity. The blow left August staring blankly into space with a thin trail of drool escaping his lips, his brain seemingly short-circuiting from the combined trauma. As August sat there with birds metaphorically spinning around his head, Ivan casually remarked that the sheer shock had induced a state of temporary infantile regression, dryly blaming Isabel for slapping him so hard. Ivan's demeanor suddenly shifted back to absolute seriousness. The attackers lurking in the mountains would be descending upon the crash site shortly, and they needed to be combat ready. He ordered Isabel to heave the dazed knight over her shoulder. Isabel proudly unsheathed her silver sword, asserting that she was more than capable of fighting and had no intention of standing idly by. Yet, despite her brave posture, her hands continued to tremble uncontrollably. Trembling hands instantly froze upon the hilt of her sword. Ivan cut her off sharply, acknowledging that while she certainly possessed natural talent, there was absolutely no reason for her to throw her life away or take unnecessary risks. Isabel bristled with annoyance at the utter boldness with which he spoke to her. Turning his back to her, the veteran nonchalantly remarked that her volatile personality resembled her mother's far more than her father's, leaving Isabel rooted to the spot in complete shock. Leaving her behind, Ivan immediately began issuing commanding orders to the surviving passengers with the natural authority of a seasoned general, demanding a fire be lit and instructing them to fashion warm blankets from the train seats. Isabel grew deeply anxious, voicing her fear that lighting a bright fire would draw the enemy straight to their location. Ignoring her concerns, Ivan strode with firm, unwavering steps straight into the pitch-black wilderness. She asked if he was truly planning to face the danger alone. He simply replied that it was none of her concern, his silhouette quickly dissolving into the eerie shadows of the dense forest without a single trace of fear in his stride. Before disappearing entirely, he repeated his warning for her to stop worrying, assuring her that he knew precisely what he was doing. Under the cold brilliance of the full moon illuminating the battlefield, Ivan operated on a simple golden military rule. Always assume the absolute worst-case scenario and make the absolute best tactical decision possible. In true life-or-death combat, those words were the difference between survival and slaughter. Ivan moved like a phantom between the ancient trees as enemy squads advanced with flickering torches, operating under the arrogant assumption that they held the upper hand and expecting the helpless survivors to flee in terror so they could hunt them down one by one. Isabel organized the passengers as instructed, knowing that if they scattered in panic, the enemy would track them down individually, the absolute worst-case scenario. That was precisely why Ivan's plan was the exact opposite. Lighting a massive bonfire at the crash site, the survivors made themselves the most glaring, visible target in the entire forest. Just to alter their strategy from a chaotic pursuit to a coordinated encirclement around the beacon of light, the enemies inadvertently exposed their exact positions. To Ivan, the soldiers' glowing torches were like blinding lighthouses in the dark, placing them squarely in his crosshairs. The enemy troops advanced with foolish confidence, completely unaware that they were the true prey in this lethal game. Watching their every move through his iron sights, Ivan knew that to defeat an enemy, one had to become their ultimate nightmare. Adjusting his finger on the trigger, he prepared to strike in the most unexpected way possible, activating his specialized handgun snapping technique, a lethal marksmanship method developed by the extermination squad to deliver pinpoint sniper precision at long range using a standard pistol. Bang! The first shot connected cleanly, and the lead soldier crumpled to the frozen ground before his comrades could even process what had occurred. Panic erupted through the enemy ranks as one of their own fell instantly, no one able to discern where the bullet had come from. The soldiers shouted in utter confusion, frantically attempting to flank a firing position that had already been abandoned. Ivan slid effortlessly through the thick brush. In a forest as dark as this, carrying a burning torch was nothing less than wearing a glowing target that screamed, "Kill me." Reappearing silently behind another soldier, Ivan drove his heavy tactical axe straight through the man's chest in one brutal strike, leaving the wretched soul only enough breath to scream as he died. Another terrified soldier lost his composure entirely, wildly firing his weapon blind into the shadows while shrieking in absolute terror. A sudden flash of steel cut through the air as Ivan cleaved the man cleanly in half with a single devastating swing, spraying crimson blood across the snow. Turn's mechanical efficiency was terrifying to behold. There was no honor here, only cold, calculated results. Swinging his weapon over his shoulder, Ivan paused to exhale a heavy, weary breath as he surveyed the gruesome butchery around him. To a veteran like him, these enemy extermination squads were nothing more than meat for the slaughter. With practiced, methodical precision, he checked his pistol, making sure every remaining bullet would count in this deadly game of shadows. He moved with such terrifying speed and efficiency that it felt as though a single man had completely surrounded the entire enemy force. Meanwhile, back at the enemy command perimeter, the reports reaching the officer were disastrous. 3 more men had just been wiped out, all of them brutally hacked to pieces by an axe. Pelos, the pale centurion, began to suspect that they were not dealing with ordinary guards, but rather a high-tier elite unit or something infinitely worse. Gunshots suddenly echoed from the north and the west in rapid succession. Pelos sharpened his senses, desperately trying to triangulate the attacker's position, but the shots were closing in far too quickly. The demon wondered in growing disbelief if the enemy somehow possessed exact knowledge of their location. Maintaining his composure, Pelos snatched a rifle from one of his trembling subordinates. It was time to take matters into his own hands. He fired a rapid burst into the air, not to kill, but to gauge his opponent's tactical reaction. A flash of shock and dark fury crossed his face as the truth finally clicked in his mind. The entire force attacking them was just a single person. His subordinate refused to believe it, insisting it was physically impossible for one man to fire simultaneously from so many different locations across the forest. The truth lay hidden among the dark branches, a complex network of tripwires connected to the weapons of fallen soldiers. Deep in the shadows, an enemy boot tripped over one of Ivan's invisible wires, triggering a rigged rifle to fire automatically into the night. Those are our own gunshots, Apelos roared in realization, finally understanding that they had been lured into a psychological trap and manipulated from the start. This panic rippled through the surviving soldiers upon realizing they had been blindly shooting at shadows and each other. As the enemy collapsed into total hysteria, Ivan emerged seamlessly from the darkness to harvest another life. Analyzing the strategy, Apelos recognized that the very first shot had been a precise test, and every shot since had been nothing more than psychological bait designed to herd their search teams into a meat grinder. Tyrion wondered what kind of monster was capable of executing such a feat, briefly wondering if the hero's daughter was hiding terrifying, unnatural power. He recalled the legend of the hero, a force of martial absurdity capable of annihilating entire armies single-handedly. Tightening his jaw, Apelos ordered his remaining troops to consolidate immediately while he went out to hunt the intruder himself. His men were paralyzed with fear, knowing that leaving their captain alone in these haunted woods felt like a death sentence for them all. The night wore on beneath an indifferent moon as the harsh caw of a raven shattered the dead silence of the woods. At the survivors' camp, the terror was suffocating. Several passengers wept quietly, whispering desperate prayers for their mothers. Isabel tried frantically to shock Sir August back to his senses, but the wounded knight could only babble deliriously about fireflies. Suddenly, the sharp snap of a dry twig broke the circle of firelight, sending Isabel's battle instincts into overdrive. An imposing, elegant figure stepped out from the encroaching dark. Apelos walked toward the fire with the slow, predatory grace of an apex monster. The demon introduced himself with supreme arrogance. "I am Apelos, Centurion of the Royal Guard's 6th Division." His glowing eyes locked onto the young woman as he unsheathed his gleaming blade. "You are the daughter of the hero," he declared coldly, setting the stage for an inevitable execution. Just a few hundred meters away, Ivan leaned against a rough tree trunk for a brief moment, wiping fresh blood from his face. At his count, he had already claimed 50 casualties. His hands, stained dark with foreign blood, gripped the handle of his axe with a terrifying natural familiarity. Glancing back at the gruesome trail of corpses he had left in his wake, he noted that the sweep was nearly complete. With a swift practice motion, he stowed his knife away. Yet, despite his absolute tactical success, his thoughts grew darker and heavier by the second as he walked through the bloody remnants of the forest. "If this were an academy novel, this tutorial would be far too hard for anyone," he murmurs to himself. He remembers how Sidis's tutorial was child's play compared to the slaughter on this train. In his mind, he visualizes Isabel's situation as if it were a game interface, trapped, surrounded, and with no clear way out. The system is fundamentally unfair, a horde of elite soldiers attacking a novice without so much as explaining the rules of combat. To make matters worse, the area boss is a monster capable of perceiving lines of fire. It is an almost guaranteed game over. Ivan knows there are games designed for you to lose in the tutorial, but this isn't a game. The intent here is to kill. Unless a helper NPC steps in, the girl doesn't stand a single chance. Then Ivan stops. It is time to make his entrance. Kim Seung-woo pauses to reflect on his own existence in this world. Is he really nothing more than a simple helper NPC? As he glides through the shadows, he thinks about the background characters, who don't even make it into the final credits. He leaps with agile grace between the trees, questioning if he will ever be able to return to his original reality. He takes a moment to analyze the situation. The absurd difficulty of this tutorial makes no sense, and Isabel's life hangs by a thread. A shadow of doubt and exhaustion crosses his blood-stained face, but there is only one way to find the answers he seeks. Ivan watches the camp from a distance, weighing the consequences of his actions before deciding on his next move. Down in the forest clearing, Apelos completely controls the situation. Isabel looks small and defenseless against the imposing centurion. "But you are weak," the demon whispers with a blood-curdling smile, savoring his absolute superiority. Isabel breathes heavily, her gear battered and filthy as her willpower begins to crack under the enemy's crushing pressure. "I won't intervene," Ivan tells himself in the darkness, resolved to let the girl's fate unfold without his help. Suddenly the ring of metal against metal echoes through the woods. Isabel attacks out of pure desperation, but her strikes fail to find their mark. Apelos mockingly compares her to those model students who only know how to memorize soulless combat manuals. "You're wrong," the young woman screams, lunging with a thrust that the demon blocks with insulting elegance. The survivors hold their breath as they watch their protector shoved back, losing ground with every passing second. Coldly, Apelos explains that swordsmanship is nothing more than the simple methodology of driving the tip of a blade into an opponent's body. The centurion looks down at her with pure contempt, bitterly disappointed that the hero's descendant is so hopelessly inexperienced in actual battle. "Shut the fuck up," Isabel roars, attempting one last desperate assault as her eyes burn with fury. The final clash is decisive. Isabel's sword flies from her grip, spinning wildly into the air beneath the moonlight before plunging into the surrounding darkness, leaving the young warrior completely disarmed. Apelos laments the unnecessary loss of his soldiers to someone who is defeated so easily, pointing his blade directly at Isabel's throat. "Daughter of the hero, do you have any last words?" Tears fill her eyes as the memory of her father, the great hero, floods her mind in the face of her defeat. In her darkest moment, she recalls a bitter warning. She should have never tried to become a hero. She remembers Soragast's words, "A hero isn't the strongest, but the one with the most guts." Soragast was badly wounded when he let slip that they shouldn't try to be heroes. The knight had told her that the very first step is accepting that you are weak. In ancient times, warriors would kneel before the king, swearing not to seek personal glory. That was the oath of Tales, to see the world through the eyes of those who cannot defend themselves. Back in the present, Isabel lies battered and bruised, finally, admitting the truth to herself. She is weak. Apolos wastes no time, lunging forward to finish the job. Yet Isabel remains completely clear about why she fights. It isn't for fame or glory, but simply because it is the right thing to do. Helping others should be as natural as helping up someone who has fallen. Thinking he has victory within his grasp, the demon attacks with everything he has. Suddenly, Isabel's hand begins to glow with a brilliant, intense blue aura. This isn't born from blind bravado, but from fighting with genuine humility. Doing good is something humble, yet absolutely essential. Her eyes ignite, and she grips her weapon with newfound power. Swords clash in a furious exchange, sending sparks flying in every direction as she moves with a speed the demon never anticipated. Apolos stands in utter shock, unable to comprehend where such overwhelming power came from. The blue aura explodes, illuminating the entire area as Isabel delivers a final precise strike. Beneath the pale moonlight, her sword pierces straight through the demon's chest. Blood pours onto the ground as the monster breaks down, bitterly lamenting his fate, and unable to believe he was defeated by the hero's daughter. As the demon collapses to his knees completely destroyed, Isabel rejects that title. She introduces herself with pure pride, declaring that she is Isabel, daughter of Maximilian and Marie. With one last groaning gasp, the demon dies. As the adrenaline fades, Isabel collapses to the ground, entirely exhausted, though relieved that the immediate danger has passed. Surrounding villagers embrace each other in tears, unable to believe they are still alive. Noticing that something feels off, Isabel peers into the shadows. Ivan Petrovic emerges calmly from the darkness, stepping right over the demon's corpse, and confirming that this was the last of them. Lying on the ground, Isabel laughs out of sheer relief, telling him that he is amazing. Ivan reflects that this attack was merely the classic awakening event of a tutorial. He knows that in a normal novel, every single villager would have died to force her character growth, leaving Isabel completely alone after a total massacre. However, that script changed, because Ivan chose to step in on his own terms. He is no mere background filler character following a predetermined plot. Suddenly Ivan's mind drifts back to the war, to a time when the sky split in two. He remembers the hero's squad, and what they sought to witness on that distant night. The hero had wanted to confirm that the morning star was still up there, shining brightly despite the surrounding darkness. Ivan admits he never particularly liked the man, yet he deeply admired that light. The hero always spoke of the morning star with a smile, as if it were the most natural beacon in the world. Catching her breath, Isabel remembers it now too, feeling that very light still lingering above, unreachable, yet enduringly present. Setting his memories aside, Ivan Petrovic refocuses on his true objective, ensuring that the children of his former comrades make it alive to their graduation. Still, he knows something isn't right. It is far from normal for demons to move so freely near the capital. Pulling a potion from his coat, he ponders who is directing them, and how many enemies have already infiltrated the academy. Isabel freezes as he approaches, uncertain whether this man is an ally, or something far more dangerous. Yet Ivan, with the cold gaze of an extermination squad veteran, simply tells her he is going to heal her, even as his terrifying warrior's aura chills everyone around him. The demon glared at Ivan with burning hatred, as the healing potion continued to pour over his body. Every drop caused unbearable pain, yet even while suffering, he refused to surrender. You think letting me live is going to make me betray my own kind? You wretched curse, you filthy humans, what? You think you're going to torture me? Go ahead, try it. I am Centurion Ibelos, of the 6th Dragon Commander's Guard Infantry Division. Remember my face, because I won't forget yours either, not even in hell. Ivan had never really expected the demon to reveal anything important. The very next moment, the demon bit off his own tongue in an attempt to keep silent. Watching this, Ivan simply sighed before speaking in a calm voice. Guess he really is just a frontline grunt. I can't believe people still buy into that old myth. Biting off your own tongue won't kill you. The human body isn't built to be that fragile. If it were, people would be dropping dead from choking on dinner every day. When you can't move to begin with, the only way you're dying is from a heart attack. Without showing the slightest hesitation, Ivan grabbed every healing potion he had, and poured them straight into the demon's mouth. Doing that just drags out the pain. Look, I'm not here to torture you, Centurion, this is just first aid, and this is a healing potion. The moment those words reached him, the demon's eyes widened with fury. The poison spider Petrovich. As the healing potion took effect, the demon's battered body rapidly recovered. His severed tongue regenerated completely, allowing him to speak once again. I heard you were dead. This method arg the extermination squad, I see. So that's what this is. Hearing those words, Ivan fell into thought. Did he serve on the front lines during the war? After a brief pause, Ivan looked directly at the demon and asked, why are you personally stepping in? Someone of your caliber isn't a disposable asset your side can simply throw away like this. The demon answered without hesitation. Because we couldn't afford another failure. The moment Ivan heard that response, everything suddenly clicked in his mind. Another failure? Don't tell me. Now I get it. That's why someone this strong was assigned as Isabel's opponent during the tutorial. Since I neutralized their previous operation before it even began, the demons dispatched an officer-level powerhouse to make sure they wouldn't fail again. But if that's the case, why send a centurion, the lowest rank among the officers? Ivan finally let out a quiet breath before speaking once more. I see. I guess there won't be another terror attack after this, considering you failed. As Ivan thought everything through, the truth became painfully clear in his mind. This whole incident was nothing more than a terror attack carried out by a handful of radicals. Looking at the demon, Ivan spoke in a calm but unwavering voice. The ones who pulled your strings will tell the Allied forces that exact story, and then they'll throw you away. I know. The demon slowly lifted his weapon before letting out a bitter laugh. Makes sense. From the very beginning, whether I succeeded or not, I was a thrown weapon that was never meant to return, just like the extermination squad. Ivan stepped forward and firmly grabbed one of the demon's horns before speaking again. You've got 3 options left. Option 1, stay locked up, get dragged to the capital city of Prichinkaya, and die under brutal torture and magical seals at the hands of counterintelligence. Option 2, get released right here and head back home. Of course counterintelligence will tail you wherever you go, and your own people will treat you like a traitor who sold out just to save his own skin. Before Ivan could continue with the third option, the demon suddenly interrupted him. Closing his eyes, he began reciting a prayer with absolute conviction. Though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear no evil, for I am with you. I am the northern star in the darkest night. I am the lighthouse in the storm-tossed sea. The demon then opened his eyes and shouted at Ivan, quit stalling and just kill me. Watching the demon's unwavering resolve, Ivan asked him an unexpected question. A prayer to the Demon King? Are your parents still alive? The demon stared at him in complete confusion. What? What the hell are you talking about? After a brief pause, he answered, I run an orphanage. The moment Ivan heard those words, an old memory resurfaced in his mind. Someone had once given him a mission. Go kill the 7 dragon commanders. All 8 strike teams had been completely wiped out, and only 1 survivor had managed to return alive. When I made it back alive, that was when Elizaveta had spoken to him. Live out the rest of your life quietly. Stay off the radar. Act as if you were already dead. She had apologized because she couldn't stop that order from being issued. Despite everything, she told him she was simply grateful that he had survived. Returning to the present, Ivan looked directly into the demon's eyes and spoke with complete sincerity. If you have even the slightest desire to live, you can cast aside who you were and live forgotten, like a dead man. After listening to Ivan's words, the demon lowered his head. His expression was filled with guilt as he quietly muttered, I don't deserve it. Ivan looked at him without the slightest hint of hesitation. Everyone deserves a second chance. Loyalty and faith don't have to define your entire life. If you want, I'll break off your horns. That'll be the final chain keeping your body bound. But if you'd rather, I can lower the axe just a little further. This is your last choice, a chance to live like a human or leave this world like one. The demon remained silent for a long time, carefully weighing Ivan's offer. After thinking it over, he finally made his decision. He wanted to live. Seeing that answer, Ivan gave a small nod. Smart choice. Without wasting another second, he swung his axe and cleanly severed both of the demon's horns, permanently freeing him from the chains that had bound him. Soon afterward, a document appeared before us containing the demon's new identity. Saint Vasilisha Orphanage Register. Complete name, Apelos. Age, 50s. Status, orphan. Race, demon. After finishing everything, Ivan reflected on the situation and organized his thoughts. My most convincing hypothesis is that this world is an academy story. And just as that hypothesis predicted, Isabel, the hero's daughter, was ambushed. But because of my interference, the tutorial's difficulty shot through the roof. That means the demons aren't simply scripted AIs following a predetermined path. They, and everyone else in this world, aren't just NPCs. If that's true, then predicting every single event is impossible, and obsessing over every step of the process is probably meaningless. In the end, there's only one thing I need to focus on: the ending. Keeping these kids alive until graduation. Even if the players, the characters, the NPCs, and every event spiral off in completely unexpected directions, that one objective can never change. A short while later, Isabel looked at Ivan and quietly asked, Master, if I hadn't boarded this train today, would their families, would the people on this train have made it out alive? Ivan rested his weapon before calmly replying, probability yes. But inside his mind, another thought echoed. Because they aren't just NPCs either. He then continued speaking to Isabel. 30,000 a year. Just to clear a path for the hero's party to infiltrate. That was the annual casualty count caused by drawing the Demon King's forces into a battle they could never win. It was a desperate strategy meant to eliminate the 7 dragon commanders and, eventually, the Demon King. But the cost was 30,000 lives every single year, sacrificed by the hero's own hand. The hero, myself, the soldiers, everyone knew it. And yet the hero kept smiling through it all. Even during the days when hope was so scarce that you had to split open the heavens just to find a single morning star, he had no choice. He had to become the light of hope for everyone. The moment he broke it would have been the end of the Allied kingdoms. Ivan slowly raised his hand and pointed toward the countless stars scattered across the night sky. Take a look, that's the star your father carried back then, and now, it's the star you're going to carry. Isabel stared up at the sky before looking back at Ivan with a puzzled expression. Which star? There are so many I can barely see. Ivan looked directly at Isabel before speaking in a calm but resolute voice. Being a hero doesn't just mean being the strongest. The one who never kneels beneath any burden and never loses their smile, no matter how difficult the moment, that's who we call the hero. Placing a hand gently on Isabel's shoulder, he continued. So daughter of Maximilian, Isabel, lift your head and stand tall, stand with hope. Isabel quietly listened as Ivan went on. Live your life remembering to be grateful for someone's sacrifice before feeling guilty about it. Prove to everyone that their sacrifice wasn't in vain. People pity those who are consumed by sadness, but they admire the ones who keep smiling. Ivan smiled faintly before adding, just like the morning star. After a brief silence, Isabel looked at him with a curious expression. Any chance you're thinking of shaving that beard? Ivan immediately shook his head in refusal, making Isabel smile as the serious atmosphere finally lightened. Some time later, St. Yansk University, late February. Even in the chilly early spring morning, the university campus was overflowing with life. Freshmen, unable to hide their excitement and joy, filled the entrance grounds, while upperclassmen watched them with expressions that almost seemed pitiful. Long lines stretched across every corner of the campus as students eagerly waited for the entrance ceremony. It looked like nothing more than an ordinary first day at the academy. That was, until an enormous shadow suddenly spread across the entire campus of St. Yansk University. Every student instinctively looked up toward the sky. A warship. Another student gasped in disbelief. An airborne battleship. A third student shouted at the top of his lungs. Holy crap, isn't that the official crest of Kalyan? A brief explanation followed. National crest, the official emblem or insignia representing a nation. At that very moment, an officer came running forward in complete panic. We're so screwed, we are totally screwed. Excellency, a Kalyan warship is hovering right over Prichinkaya. Isabel glanced up at the massive battleship and replied with visible irritation. My good sir, I have eyes. Despite maintaining her composure, she couldn't help thinking to herself, man, I just hope they don't end up killing those Kalyan people. Meanwhile, Ivan calmly watched everything unfold. Well, Isabel and Asitas got caught in a train derailment, so the fact that they both walked away completely unharmed is basically a miracle. Honestly, what the elves are doing up in the sky right now can be summarized in just 2 sentences. At that exact moment, a loud voice echoed from the airborne battleship. Your border control is a complete joke. We protect our own kids. Most people would never believe anyone would actually pull off something this outrageous, but Ivan knew it was entirely within the realm of possibility. Either way, Elpihera, the daughter of the hero party's elf, is probably on that battleship. Just then, Isabel called out from behind him. Mister, didn't you say you were on the faculty? Before Ivan could answer, she continued excitedly. No, wait. With skills like yours, you've got to be a professor, right? Which department? PE? Definitely physical education. Probably not the night department. So wait, does Yansk University actually have an assassination curriculum? So you really are a PE professor? Ivan stopped walking for a moment and quietly looked at her. Isabel, the hero's daughter, has arrived too. Then he answered in the most unexpected way possible. I'm a gardener. As they continued toward the academy, Ivan silently reviewed everything in his mind. Along with Priscilla, who already arrived safely, and Lucia, Enrique's apprentice, who had been in the capital from the very beginning, I also just confirmed that Oscar Guilver's son has arrived as well. All of the hero party's children have safely reached the academy. Looking toward the main campus building, Ivan muttered to himself. The entrance ceremony is at the main auditorium. Guess it's time for me to prepare for what's coming next. Even the main Swedenhenning. It event looked tough, because in an academy story something unexpected always happens during the entrance ceremony. At that very moment, the scene shifted to a man wearing a white coat, staring into the air with complete confusion. He exclaimed, "What on earth is this?" Floating directly in front of him was a mysterious translucent window. Across its surface were the words, "Congratulations." It was a status window. After that, we are told, the Northern Grand Duke's scoundrel swordsmanship prodigy changes completely the moment he's possessed, and is showered with love. Afterward, he stylishly stops a terrorist attack at the academy he enrolls in, and rises to stardom overnight. Right now, my original name is Eugene, but in this story, I'm Yevgeny Novikov Karamzin. In front of Yevgeny, a system window suddenly appears, displaying a new quest. It reads, "Congratulations, a new quest has begun. Rank D, stop the academy raid. The academy is under attack by an unidentified group. Stop the attack on the grand auditorium and department facilities during the entrance ceremony. Required, remove academy explosives 0/3. Optional, eliminate intruders. Optional, protect new students 0320 seconds. Yevgeny looks at the window and thinks to himself, as you can see, I'm a possessor. He is still staring toward the window when, all of a sudden it turns red. A new window appears right in front of him, and this time, it simply says, reward, cancelled. Seeing this, Yevgeny is completely confused, and he thinks to himself, why did the quest suddenly cancel? Was choosing the theology department a mistake? My plan was perfect. I made a swordsmanship prodigy like me join the theology department, since the sharpest thing I've ever held was a kitchen knife in my entire life, so how can I start fighting monsters with a sword now? Learning swordsmanship and actually using it to slaughter something are completely different things. Yevgeny remains where he is, thinking about his situation. For someone who's never even cut apart a chicken, this is far too much for a modern Korean, hence I chose the theology department. According to the setting, I'm talented with a sword too. If everything went according to plan, I'd have swordsmanship, buffs, and healing skills. After that, all that was left was to safely become ridiculously overpowered. Why did the status window suddenly give me a quest, only to cancel it right afterward? Damn it, why did this happen? We then see Ivan in another location, where he is busy defusing the bombs. At the same time, the first required objective in the quest window is completed. After successfully disarming the bombs, Ivan simply says, disarmed. He then continues thinking, an attack taking place at an academy entrance ceremony is just common sense. However, with bombers in the sky and the counterintelligence command on extreme alert right now, attacking the academy is suicidal. Even so, they pulled the trigger. Ivan carefully considers the situation and continues reasoning. They chose a place that wouldn't catch the guards' attention, a blind spot where they wouldn't be exposed to any civilians, and angles invisible from every building's windows. They found places that met all those conditions. This is the work of a professional. Ivan is still thinking as he follows their logic backward. So if I track back their logic, I can pinpoint where they planted the bombs, figure out roughly where the bombs are, then casually walk over and pick them up. We then see Ivan carrying all the bomb boxes outside. He takes them to the ground and begins burying them underground. As he does so, he thinks to himself, at this point, it's no different from harvesting baby potatoes. After dealing with the bombs, Ivan starts thinking about the people responsible. Now the only question is, who did this? The problem is that too many suspects come to mind. The ones with the strongest motive to terrorize St. Jansk University are demons. But unless they're idiots, they wouldn't pull something like this right after failing. Lack of ability elves. They have a warship floating over St. Jansk University. So they could be the easiest ones to blame for terrorism, but they have little to gain from a bombing. Lack of motive. Then the most likely culprit is the Crown Prince faction. They have both the means and the motive to attack St. Jansk University. But today would have been especially difficult, since Elizaveta's enraged counterintelligence command is guarding this whole area. With that, Ivan takes a long breath and continues thinking to himself, in a typical Academy genre story, right? An attack at the Academy entrance ceremony is a must. Secret agents have to be planted inside the Academy for it to qualify as an Academy genre story. However, while Ivan is still busy with his work, someone suddenly speaks from behind him. What is that now? A black Santa Claus? The moment Ivan hears the voice, we see just how incredibly fast his reaction speed is. He instantly picks up a stone and throws it at the person behind him. But the mysterious man in front of him effortlessly cuts the stone apart with his sword. However, there is an unexpected twist. Because of the dust that rises into the air, the mysterious man disappears from Ivan's sight. Ivan simply says, Santa Claus. At this moment, he looks extremely angry as he continues. There is no Christmas in this world. No old man exists who puts candy and toys in stockings. With that, Ivan immediately begins searching the area for the mysterious man, looking around in every direction. Then, as the man escapes the area at incredible speed, he says, it's definitely a possessor. Afterward, we see a large building, and the narration tells us that this is the counterintelligence command. Ivan slowly begins walking toward the building, still visibly angry. The guard standing outside immediately raises his gun and points it at him, warning him, hey, wait, stop right there. This is a restricted area, if you ignore my warning. But Ivan is extremely well trained, and his reaction speed is far beyond ordinary people. In an instant, he grabs the guard's gun and dismantles it with ease. He then twists the man's arm and calmly says, they're well trained. At that moment, several more guards arrive and immediately point their guns at Ivan. Looking around at them, Ivan says, the disguise is good too. He then simply tells them, call Dmitri. Hearing this, the officer stammers in surprise. Do you know Lieutenant Colonel Dmitri? Don't cause a scene here, let's talk somewhere quiet. After hearing that, Ivan looks toward all of them with an increasingly irritated expression and says, my name is Ivan Petrovich. Anyone here from the extermination unit? One of the officers immediately responds, I was in the final class. Senior, excuse me, but may I see your face? After a moment, Ivan releases the man he was holding. However, even now, all the soldiers surrounding him continue pointing their guns directly at him. Ivan looks around at them and mutters, good heavens, it really is. The officer stares at Avin's face, remembering what he looked like in the past, and says, "Little Avin." Avin immediately shows him the respect due to a superior, and says, "It's an honor, Lieutenant Colonel Petrovich. I'm Osip Soronov, formerly of the 3rd Strike Team. I've only seen you once, from very far away." Hearing this, Avin simply says, "Do not mourn those who departed first." He then walks forward and continues, "For I too stand in the same ranks as them." The soldier looks at him in disbelief and says, "I heard you were killed in action, Lieutenant Colonel. I definitely saw your nameplate at the National Cemetery." Avin responds calmly, "I also never thought there would be a survivor from the 3rd Strike Team, instead of the finest men of this age." Hearing those words, the soldier replies, "I survived, all of us did." After hearing that, Avin continues walking forward and simply says, "Bring Dmitri to me, and the incoming students." No, Avin looks extremely angry as he says, "I want the full list of undergraduates, faculty and observers attending the entrance ceremony. VIPs, their families, acquaintances, relatives, everyone who can currently access St. Yansk University. Tell them I need the lists of every last one." Hearing this, the soldier immediately responds, "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel." He then turns to his men and orders them, "Hey! Inform Lieutenant Colonel Cherkatov. Tell him there's been an emergency." Wham! Avin watches his men move into action while thinking to himself, the target is a possessor, their specialty is swordsmanship. As he recalls the encounter, he continues reasoning, a young male or female? If male, at least before his voice changed. The voice was too unclear to identify, so I'd need to hear it a couple more times to judge. Judging by their nimble movements and quick reflexes, they possess line-of-fire detection. Avin continues thinking carefully, trying to determine the possessor's identity. Could they be Korean? No. It doesn't matter. What's important is that they're an Earthling either way. What brought them here, and how did they end up in this world? Did this one also write? Or was it some accident? Did they get hit by a truck? Of course, they could be the original author. That happens often too. Avin's expression becomes even more serious as he reaches a conclusion. One thing I can be certain of is this. They know the original work is an academy genre story, because that's the only reason a possessor would deliberately enter a university. It's because they know the original work. With that thought, Avin begins looking around at the entire area above him. He is so furious that the object he is holding begins to crack and crush under the force of his grip. He then thinks, then they must know the ending too. I'm curious now. First I'll find the possessor, whether that damned original work has my ending written in it too. After that there's only one thing I have to do. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone calls out, "Yevgeny Novikov Karamzin, you pathetic fool." Yevgeny turns toward the voice and says, "Father." His father immediately scolds him. "All this commotion just from visiting the restroom? You're still as worthless as ever." Yevgeny looks completely miserable as he thinks to himself, this damn scoundrel youngest son, getting dropped into some family I know nothing about and being treated like this is already miserable enough, and now what the hell was that lunatic? Was that a monster? No, fuck, I never heard there was something like that. Suddenly new system windows appear directly in front of Yevgeny. One of them announces, a new quest has begun. More windows appear one after another, revealing the details of the quest. Rank, unknown. Gardener of St. Yansk University. You have caught his attention. May fortune be with you. Required, defeat Gardener Ivan. Optional, survive. Penalty for failure, death. Yevgeny's face turns pale, and he looks as though he is about to cry. Completely terrified by what he has just read, he stammers, I'm going to die? After that, we are shown a scene at Prichinkaya downtown cafe. Inside the cafe, a soldier is speaking to his senior, saying, Senior, I told you it's a bit awkward for us to meet in a place like this. The orphanage is fine. We should meet somewhere like that. Do you think I became a regular sponsor of your orphanage for nothing? Knowing your personality, you probably came here like this because it's urgent, but still. Just as he says this, the moment Ivan enters the room with him, everyone sitting there immediately turns their attention toward them. For a brief moment, all of them stare in their direction with cold and intimidating eyes, creating an atmosphere that makes it clear they were ready for trouble. However, the soldier captain simply smiles and calmly tells everyone, everyone, get back to what you were doing, act natural. As soon as he says this, everyone immediately goes back to whatever they were doing before, acting as though nothing had happened. It becomes almost impossible to believe that these same people had been releasing such a strong killing intent just moments earlier. After that, Ivan and the soldier captain walk over and sit down together, away from the others. The soldier captain then looks at Evan and asks, So, what did you bring me? Evan calmly replies, It's better if you see for yourself. Without wasting any time, Evan places all the bombs in front of him, the very same bombs he had managed to defuse before they could detonate. The moment the captain sees them, he becomes extremely angry, and immediately begins releasing his powerful aura. Evan quickly explains, I removed the bomb's detonator. Hearing this, the soldier captain immediately responds, Tell me that first, you nearly scared me to death. After taking a closer look at the bombs, the captain continues his analysis, saying, The mana capacity is weak. It doesn't seem intended for destroying a building or assassinating a VIP, so it was probably meant to distract us, right? Someone nearby immediately agrees with him and says, yeah, there must have been a separate infiltration team. Just then, a woman arrives at the table, and the captain hands all of the bombs over to her. He then gives her an important order, saying, it's definitely not the Crown Prince's faction. We haven't missed anyone on our end. Send this to the headquarters magic department. The woman immediately accepts the order and replies respectfully, yes, Lieutenant Colonel. With that, the captain hands Ivan something and says, here, the thing you asked for. I really sweated bullets trying to get this prepared on such short notice. Ivan simply takes it and says, thank you. The captain then adds, also, Her Excellency wants to see you sometime. Do you have time? Hearing this, Ivan replies, that'll be difficult for a while. Without saying anything more, Ivan immediately gets up and leaves the place. Shortly after Ivan leaves, the same woman returns to the captain and says, Lieutenant Colonel Petrovich. Truly little Ivan. His reputation isn't just for show, it's amazing. The captain responds with a smile. That's why people need to date. Look how gloomy he's gotten, cooped up inside without any sunlight, living all alone. Right, put a tail on him. Don't leave my senior alone by himself. The reason behind all of these words and what exactly the captain was planning is not revealed to us yet. After returning to his room, Ivan immediately begins going through all the documents he had received. As he carefully examines the information, he says, there are about 3,000 freshmen who enrolled this year. Since St. Yansk University is a 3-year program, the total number of undergraduates is around 1,000. He then looks at the list of freshmen and continues analyzing the information. Add the graduate students and those on a leave of absence to that, and if you include the faculty, professors, teaching assistants, security guards, administrative staff, and admissions officers, the total comes out to 1,733. We also have to look into the families of the freshmen who attended the entrance ceremony, because all of them can be included in the pool of suspects. After that, he examines another document titled Personal Information of All Undergraduates. Going through the information, Ivan continues, in other words, if you consider the foreign VIPs and the families of each student, the total is 2,429. Ivan then becomes completely serious as he looks through the information and says, I know you are in here. I know this because I'm a transmigrator myself. You'll try to use your prior knowledge to build a solid network, spread modern culture, mimicking the actions of the protagonist from the original work. You're probably enjoying the fact that you transmigrated, looking at everyone else as mere objects. You probably feel like you're enjoying a well-made theme park. After the past war, where the NPCs fought so fiercely, had ended, you probably wanted to enroll in the academy and enjoy a game transmigration trope. The lives of the countless people who are passed over as mere background lore text, you probably wouldn't want to know, nor would you understand. I won't assume it'll be easy to find you, but it won't take long either. The investigation continues throughout the night. Ivan keeps examining document after document, narrowing down the enormous number of possible suspects one by one. He does not stop even as the hours pass, and before he realizes it, the darkness outside slowly disappears, and night turns into morning. By the time the sun rises, 3 students' complete records are finally spread out in front of him. After spending the entire night investigating, Ivan has managed to narrow his search down to these 3 individuals. His desk is still covered with documents, while his axe has been casually thrown down beside him. Ivan looks at the information in front of him and simply says, I promise you that. After that, we are shown a scene where 2 students are sitting together. Just then, Isabel notices someone she recognizes, and immediately realizes that it is her friend, Nazareth. The moment Nazareth sees Isabel as well, her face lights up with happiness, and she quickly comes over to her. Isabel happily greets her saying, it's been so long. At the same time, the girl who had been sitting with Isabel introduces herself to Nazareth and says, nice to meet you, I'm Yuri Frank. Please, just call me Yuri. She then looks at Nazareth and politely asks, Miss Einarsdottir, is that what I should call you? Nazareth immediately explains, that just means Dad's daughter. Between us, please just call me Nazareth. Hearing this, Yuri looks surprised and says, just Nazareth, but you're a princess. Nazareth becomes so emotional that she starts tearing up and says, a princess. She says, I'm seriously tearing up because I have never been treated like this before. She explains that no one had been willing to sit down and eat with her all this time, which is why this simple act of friendship means so much to her. Yuri, confused by the situation, asks why nobody was willing to get close to her. Isabel then explains, because Nazareth's uncle has been escorting her. Nazareth starts laughing almost hysterically as she talks about her situation, saying, my uncle completely ruined everything for me, my college life. Thank you, Isabel. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have made a single friend. Isabel immediately corrects her and says, you should be thanking Yuri, not me. She might not look it, but she's a very precious person. Yuri is a full scholarship student in our department. She's really good with a sword. Better than me, of course, and even better than Oscar. Where did someone like her even come from? Hearing that, Nazareth looks at Yuri in surprise and asks, wow, better than you, Isabel? Yuri becomes slightly embarrassed by the praise and replies modestly, you are flattering me. I was just lucky. While all of this is happening, Ivan is quietly observing the 3 of them from a distance. As he watches the situation, he begins putting the pieces together in his mind. Isabel, Nazareth, and a freshman. Yuri Frank, a heavily discussed freshman who enrolled on a full scholarship despite being an orphan. Like most war orphans here, it's highly likely that she named herself Yuri Frank. Ivan continues analyzing her name and background, realizing that there is something unusual about her identity. Of course, Yuri Frank is a fairly common first and last name in Krasilov. However, in the Krasilov cultural sphere, Yuri is a male name, and the only countries that use it as a female name are South Korea and Japan. In other words, Yuri Frank is a candidate for being a transmigrator. Ivan had already cut down all the unnecessary branches in his investigation, and after doing so, he was preparing to move forward with his next step. But just then, we are shown another girl nearby, and she calls out to someone, saying, "Yevgeny, let's go together." "What's your afternoon class?" "I'm heading to the orientation for biblical hermeneutics." Yevgeny responds to her, saying, "I have original gospel reading," but then he quickly realizes what he said and corrects himself with an awkward, "Oh, sorry." The girl simply smiles and says, "No worries, I'll see you later, enjoy your class." After she leaves, Yevgeny continues on his way, thinking to himself, "If I'd known there was this much to learn, I never would have chosen the theology department." Besides, as he stands there however, he suddenly gets the feeling that someone is watching him. The scene then shifts upward, revealing Ivan sitting high in a tree. Yevgeny looks around and thinks to himself, "I'm being followed by a catapult-launching, crazy-eyed Santa Claus." Just as a branch above him is cut, Yevgeny looks upward, and finally notices Ivan. At the same time, Ivan realizes that Yevgeny has made eye contact with him and thinks, "That guy, just now, he made eye contact with me. I was tailing him from quite a distance away from the main theology building, but he still noticed me." And Ivan then begins analyzing Yevgeny more carefully. This guy also has a normal name, nothing special about it, Yevgeny. But if you trace the etymology of Yevgeny, he considers how the name is used across different countries before continuing. It means that, aside from the pronunciation, it's a name commonly used in South Korea as well. Ivan seriously considers his options and asks himself, should I catch him and interrogate him? But after thinking it through, he decides against it. No, I need to make preparations if I want to handle this without any repercussions. The scene then shifts as Yevgeny moves to another location, while Ivan continues following his trail. Ivan thinks to himself, I can kill or kidnap him whenever I want, so I'll hold off until I've confirmed the final target. Just then, we see another person nearby, carrying a large sniper rifle. She says, "Counterintelligence Command was begging me so much, I thought I'd drop by for a bit, but what the hell is that guy doing?" Without warning, she takes her shot at Ivan. Ivan manages to avoid the attack and immediately looks upward toward her position. The woman looks back at him and says, "What are you doing here?" She then adds, "Let's go to your place, disciple. I'd like to take a look around your orphanage while we're at it." The scene then cuts to St. Vasilicia Orphanage, where it is already nighttime. Inside the director's office, Enrique is surrounded by numerous documents. As she looks through Ivan's investigation, she becomes increasingly irritated and says, "Is this an analysis of the target's speech patterns? Inferred intonations by observing the meaning between the lines and the shifts in the hyoid bone, even a list of expected regions of origin based on their accents. Seriously, how have you been living your life?" Clearly frustrated by the amount of work Ivan has been doing, Enrique grabs one of the papers with considerable force and demands to know what all of this is. She then throws the paper toward him and says, "You wouldn't put in this much effort even if you were tracking down an international criminal who got a red alert from the Counterintelligence Command, and against students no less, all by yourself, staying up for days on end without sleeping." Enrique then picks up a bottle of potion and thinks to herself, there are guys like this sometimes, guys who rolled around the battlefield and became ticking time bombs that could go off at any moment. She then looks directly at Ivan and says, "Ivan Petrovich, you're human. That means there are things essential to your survival, basic things like sleep, meals, and rest. Who are you trying to catch? The St. Yansk University terrorist?" Ivan simply answers, "No, you wouldn't understand." Enrique becomes even more frustrated, grabs Ivan by the collar, and firmly tells him, "Talk." Faced with no other choice, Ivan begins explaining the situation indirectly. Let's say, by some chance there was a person like this. Someone who left behind the place they lived and all the people they knew, and just dropped, out of nowhere, into a world they've never seen before. No matter how hard they try, they can't wake up from the dream, and the world still feels like a story in a novel. Either because they didn't want to die, or because they wanted to go back, they try to do everything they possibly can. Fortunately, they seem to have some talent, so they adapted well and managed to live. Ivan continues, revealing the thoughts that have been troubling him for so long. But why won't this story end? In the midst of all that, a person suddenly pops out, a stranger, probably from the same hometown. Now, they start to think, is that guy the real protagonist? Once that guy reaches the ending, am I just going to be thrown away like this? Maybe my being dragged here was nothing more than a godlike being that controls this world making a tiny insignificant mistake. After listening to everything Ivan has said, Enrique becomes deeply troubled. She looks at him and slowly puts the pieces together before saying, "To sum it up, you're actually a transmigrator." Ivan answers honestly, "It's hard to believe, but yes." Enrique then continues, and you recently confirmed there's another one, and you've decided you have to kill him. Ivan gives a simple confirmation, knowing how unbelievable the entire situation sounds. Yes, I knew you obviously wouldn't believe it. But then Enrique says something that completely catches Ivan off guard. Inren, listen to me carefully. You're not the first. I've met a transmigrator other than you. Ivan is completely shocked by her words. Until this moment, he believed that he was the only person who had experienced transmigration in this world. But Enrique now reveals that there was someone else before him. She then gives him the name that changes everything. That person's name is Hero Maximilian, the first hero. Enrique says that it's not common, but whenever the scales of the world tip, one or two people suddenly appear out of nowhere. People like them are called the dragged ones. That is why we don't say that a hero is born. Instead, we say that a hero appeared. Very few historical records about them remain, but according to what little is known, all of them brought their own stories with them. Some came from legends or myths, while others came from novels. Sometimes they came from plays, or even from stories depicting something entirely different. Each of them had their own story and their own ending. Some disappeared again, some died, and others remained in this world. Even then says, which means the hero's retirement is actually them seeing the ending and returning to reality. But right after saying that, Ivan suddenly grabs his head because he knows that things are still far from clear in his mind. Holding his head, he begins thinking over and over again. Everyone has a different story, a different ending. What is my ending? Being trapped in this world forever? Is there no way back? What if my ending is just death? Then maybe, if I just die, wouldn't I be able? Before he can finish his thought, we suddenly see his cheek turn red. Enrique has slapped him across the face and she immediately tells him, snap out of it. One of funny countries. She then continues, if this world is a story and a novel from your world, are we merely characters being consumed line by line, just as you said? Does that mean your world is reality, while this one is nothing more than a fragment of a story? Ivan looks at her and asks, what are you trying to say? Enrique then looks directly at him and says, so, how do we look to you? Answer me, little Ivan. Are the late king who gave you that name, and all those who came before us like that too? Enrique continues, asking, are they all nothing but supporting characters in your story? No, we're no different from you. I am alive, I breathe, I hate the sunlight, I hate blessings, I drink blood, and I enjoy tea. As she says this, she grabs Ivan by the collar and looks directly at him before continuing. You think you might just be someone's supporting character? Don't make me laugh. You are the main character of your own life, and I am the entirety of mine, just like you. After saying this, she immediately lets go of his collar and calmly continues, do you want to go back to your hometown? If so, disciple, don't wait for fate to end your story. Turn your pages with your own hands, turn them all the way to the very end, until you reach the conclusion. Ivan then speaks in a deeply depressed voice. At the end, is there anything I can decide? Enrique looks at him and replies, at the very least the choice to turn the page rests entirely with you, just like everyone else in this world, and in yours. Maximilian, that guy missed his home too. He missed his lover and the parents he had left behind. Whenever I heard about his comfortable life and mysterious civilization, I felt pity for him. But you've been living with everything bottled up inside. You couldn't feel safe anywhere, so you probably couldn't even sleep properly. For at least 4 years, or perhaps for as long as he had been alive in this world. Enrique then begins thinking to herself, there is no bedroom anywhere in this place. He hasn't been able to sleep a single night. Despite treating others like supporting characters, Ivan stubbornly insisted that he himself could never be one. And yet, at the same time, he had convinced himself that he could never be the protagonist either. Enrique then walks over to the light that is still on and turns it off before saying, you need rest. I'll stand watch, every night if necessary. This world is neither a strategy simulation nor a classic RPG. It might have been someone's story, but it wasn't mine. Amidst all of this, we are shown Ivan's entire life up until this point, allowing us to see how everything began and how he eventually ended up where he is now. We are then told that the prologue of Ivan's story has finally come to an end. At the same time, Ivan is saying, or perhaps simply thinking to himself, the prologue of the story has finally ended, but I was no longer angry at that sentence. I was too exhausted and tired to be angry. A hand patting my shoulder was warm, and it made me feel reassured. 16 years old. It was a day when I had been rolling around the battlefield for 2 years. We are then taken back to the battlefield, where the fighting is extremely intense. Ivan picks up an axe and immediately throws it toward the enemy, killing a demon in front of him. He has become so furious that he continues fighting without stopping, taking down demon after demon. Just then, someone says to him, you fought well. Hearing those words, Ivan is completely stunned. Moments later, we see a man sitting on a horse with a crown-like symbol above his head, making it clear that this person is the king. The king looks at Ivan and asks, what is your name? Ivan immediately gives his full name and answers, Conscript Ivan Petrovich. The king then tells him, look behind you. As Ivan turns around, he sees the dead bodies of the demons scattered across the battlefield. He can only stare at the scene in complete shock, unable to believe what he has just accomplished. The king then dismounts from his horse, walks toward Ivan, and tells him, raise your gaze. Ivan immediately straightens himself and stands at attention as the king begins speaking from behind him, saying, defeat was originally guaranteed in this campaign. It was a situation where we had to project our forces to other fronts, but these people survived. Ivan Petrovich, you saved them. You saved the villages behind them, and you saved their families and the residents of those villages somewhere out. The king then looks directly at Ivan and tells him, so stand tall, little Ivan. This is the first time the king gives him the name that Enrique had mentioned earlier. Ivan immediately objects, saying, I am not little. However, the king simply ignores his complaint and continues, when I was your age, fighting like you, the name I earned was Ivan the Great, so you surely don't expect to be called by the same name as me, do you? Treat that boy, and teach him. Just then, a captain approaches the king and asks, will you take him in? The king replies, just make a place for him. If he rises to a position where he can stand on his own, I shall see him again. Ivan then continues telling us what happened afterward, saying, the next time I faced the late king was right after I joined the royal guard. From then on, I was called Little Ivan. I didn't have any nightmares that day. The late king, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, was as wonderful as ever, so I was able to fall into a deep sleep. At the same time, somewhere else, we see another person looking at an old system window, where the words Quest Candid suddenly appear. As he continues staring at his old system windows, a new system window appears and informs him, miraculous luck stops your dice. You have survived. The person we now see is Yevgeny, who is currently sitting in a classroom. He suddenly starts shouting in confusion, what the? Seriously, what the hell is going on? Give me an explanation. He then explains what has happened to him, saying, I achieved the incredible feat of reaching on the very first day of my transmigration. It means I've already surpassed the level of a freshman, but that Santa Claus, I definitely wouldn't be able to beat him because I couldn't see his level. We then realize that Yevgeny is able to see the levels of all the students in his class, but there is one exception. He cannot see the level of his class teacher. Yevgeny becomes even more confused and says, he's just an academy gardener, so why couldn't I see his level? According to the original work's lore, that's how it's displayed for those whose levels surpass the standard limits, isn't it? Honestly, it was difficult to blindly trust the original work's lore. First of all, the trash sword genius of the Northern Archduke's family never even featured a demon king or a hero's party. And since this country called Krasilov was already located in the north, how could a northern archduke even exist? The only things that seemed to have anything in common were the family setting, the familiar skill tree, and the familiar status window. As everyone looked at Yevgeny's facial expression, all the students in the classroom turned their attention toward him, but he continued thinking to himself, it's a relief that the quest was cancelled, but I have absolutely no idea what kind of world I've dropped into. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the outside in the morning, where we see Ivan practicing his incredibly fast movements. He moves around a tree so quickly that at first it looks as if someone is simply cutting through the leaves and branches. But only a short while later, all the wood from the tree has been sliced into countless tiny pieces, and Ivan has done all of this using nothing more than a pair of scissors. Just then, someone approaches him from behind and says, I was watching to see what you were doing. You've made yourself look worse than the bonsai trees at my place. Ivan turns toward her and asks, Enrique, isn't it your bedtime? Enrique immediately responds, what, surprised to see a beauty? Ivan looks at her and says, you're definitely lacking sleep. Hearing that, Enrique becomes slightly annoyed and angrily replies, a gardener for a job. It definitely seems like work that's good for your mental health. Elise's method isn't bad, but my prescription is a bit different. Follow me. I was just in need of an extra hand. With that, she grabs Ivan and starts pulling him along with her. Soon they arrive at St. Yansk University Gymnasium. Once they enter, Enrique walks over to a higher position and looks down at the students before saying, nice to meet you kids. I'm Enrique, the professor teaching a mandatory course for the night department. Since it's the first class, shall we test your levels? All of you. Starting now, fight this guy. Gunoin, the person standing in front of the entire class is none other than Ivan. He stands there with both hands casually tucked into his pants pockets, looking completely relaxed and incredibly cool as all the students stare at him, knowing that he is the one they have been ordered to fight.